Chapter 410. Jilin looked at the humans in white with disdain. He felt as if there was a fire burning in his heart. Although he was always like this feeling was especially obvious at this moment. He felt that he was being looked down upon by these ants. These people were threatening him with their lives. This caused a wave of rage to arise in Jilin's heart, and he was furious in his heart. Jilin grabbed a corner of the coffin and lifted it up with one hand. This was definitely not an easy position to grab for the coffin, but it didn't matter to Jilin. He could grab it tightly. He could even lift it up and throw it out. Jilin looked at the tunnel. He had never been so satisfied with a human's narrow building. He had already calculated in his mind that if he threw the coffin along the tunnel, the flying coffin would become a huge meteor hammer without chains. From the weight of the coffin and the fragility of the humans, it should be able to open up a bloody path among the humans. It would be a real death if it hit the coffin and a wound if it grazed the coffin. It was not inferior to the monkey's iron rod. He first threw it to the left. When the coffin hit the wall, he walked to the other side and threw it behind him. After 2 rounds, it should be enough. Jilin raised the coffin and was about to throw it. The tragedy of blood splattering everywhere was about to happen, but Jilin's arm suddenly stopped. He held it up. That was because Crimson Unicorn suddenly felt a chill coming from his palm, and the source was Staya's coffin. Jilin was shocked. How could a fire dragon like him feel such a weak chill? How cold could a stone be? Besides, he had been holding it for so long. It should have warmed up. Could it be Staya's spirit in heaven? Although Jilin's heart was full of doubts, he knew that it was his psychological effect, but he didn't want to admit it. He would rather admit that there was something wrong with his brain than admit that he suddenly had such a human-like way of thinking. To Jilin, the first was like a harmless minor illness, and the second was like an incurable disease that was difficult to speak of. It was fine if his brain was damaged. What kind of illness could the dragon race not cure? However, it would be a huge problem if their minds were corrupted by humans. It would be too embarrassing. For humans, or any other creatures, avoiding the important and dwelling on the trivial was almost always the first choice. Jilin was the same. Jilin solemnly pondered for a good while, thinking that he had almost forgotten something. If the coffin was thrown out like this, wouldn't the Staya inside be scattered all over the place? That won't do. It turned out that his instincts were reminding him of this matter, and not that he had some human-like incurable disease. His objective judgment was affected by his subjective consciousness. This was not something a high-level creature like him should do. With this judgment, Jilin let out a long sigh of relief and gently put Staya's coffin on the ground. The third prince was stunned. Such a beautiful situation was not within his expectations. In his mind, at least a dozen people should have died. You are soft-hearted after all. The third prince looked at Jilin and said with certainty. Although he didn't expect this situation, he still pretended that everything was as expected. No, Jilin shook his head. I just suddenly thought that it would be easy to hurt Staya this way. The third prince smiled silently and didn't say anything. In his opinion, this was Jilin's stubbornness. He couldn't do it, but he didn't want to admit it. He felt that he had already won. Jilin couldn't take Staya's coffin away today. Jilin carefully looked at his palm and recalled the coldness he felt just now. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with him, he was slightly relieved. Jilin looked at the people in white on both sides. He didn't want to do it himself anymore, because the feeling of being unreasonable was too terrible. Brother Long, why force yourself? The third prince said. Jilin knew what this guy meant, but Jilin really wanted to ask him, aren't you underestimating me too much? In order to stop him, the third prince called hundreds of people from the Church of Light to stop him in a suicidal way. He thought that this would make him hesitate. Although Jilin didn't want to admit it, in fact, this move did have some effect. However, the third prince forgot a very important point. He was the human emperor. He could call people. However, Scarlet Unicorn was no longer the Red Calamity that could only fight alone. He was now the Red Dragon God of the Red Dragon sect, the Lord of the elemental creatures, the Beast King of the Beast race, and the God of the Sea race. The forces under his command forcibly took half of the world from the hands of the humans. In terms of the size of his forces and the number of his subordinates, Jilin didn't lose to the third prince. Since the third prince could call people, Jilin naturally could too. Flay! Boom! Jilin called out softly. The top of the stone path above his head shattered with a loud bang. Flay, the former legendary expert of the human race, the world's strongest fire magician, descended from the sky with flames all over her body. She stood beside Jilin and the third prince. Flay lowered her head and said respectfully, "My God." As the leader of the Red Dragon sect, from the moment she learned that Jilin had come to Wine Moon City, she came close to Jilin so that she could reach him at any time. However, Jilin didn't summon her, so she didn't appear. Flay. The third prince's expression immediately became gloomy. He didn't expect that Jilin would actually lower himself to ask a human to help him. He originally thought that with Jilin's pride, he wouldn't do such a thing. Flay, you were originally a human legend. The third prince gritted his teeth and said, "Do you really want the Saintess coffin to be left outside?" Saintess, legend, they're just empty titles. Flay shrugged. Her indifferent attitude was very obvious. In the end, it's just a corpse and a few stones. Even if it's left outside, how can it be considered a loss? Legend was just empty titles. Flay's words sounded pretentious and extremely annoying. However, Flay clearly had the qualifications to say such words. However, even though what she said wasn't wrong and was true, it was also very unpleasant to hear. It was so unpleasant that Jilin couldn't help but frown. He also thought the same, but he didn't say it out loud. It was because he didn't want to admit that Staya was already a corpse. In the end, he didn't expect that Flay, who he had personally called out, would say it out loud. The fact that Staya was already dead was like a sharp knife that was flickering with white light. Previously, it had been covered by a thin piece of cloth. The third prince, Jilin, and Bane all had a tacit understanding and didn't reveal it. It was as if as long as they didn't say it out loud and didn't admit it, Staya might walk out of the coffin. Until Flay arrived. She wasn't familiar with Staya, so she didn't have that kind of tacit understanding. She recklessly opened the paper window and removed the thin piece of cloth on the knife. The extremely sharp edge of the knife was exposed in the air. It was completely unobstructed. In an instant, the light of the knife shone in all directions. Even Jilin was almost injured by it, no? Perhaps she was already injured. Chapter 411. Jilin felt a chill in his heart. He felt empty. Xiaoqin blinked his eyes and looked at Flay, who had flames burning on her hands. She looked like a fire god descending to the world. Xiaoqin's fighting spirit surged as he gestured. He thought to himself, why did the person I called overstab me first? Flay, the third prince shouted, are you really going to betray humanity? Flay suddenly stopped what she was doing. She looked at the third prince and said, even if you are the human emperor, you cannot represent all of humanity. Stubbornly protecting your honor, treating a corpse and a coffin as more important than hundreds of living people. This is how you do things, how humans do things. However, we believe in the Red Dragon God and believe that the Red Dragon God can lead humanity to greater heights and abandon meaningless forms and illusions. This is how we do things, as well as how humans do things. I have never betrayed humanity. I just think that some humans are hopelessly stupid. I cannot agree with or follow your way of doing things. Jilin touched his chest and felt some pain. Flay. The third prince looked at Flay and gnashed his teeth. Back then, you were stationed at Calm Wind Pass. Everyone revered you as a hero of humanity. However, you betrayed us at the last moment, causing Calm Wind Pass to fall. Do you think that this matter is over? Do you have the face to say that you have never betrayed humanity? When Jilin saw the third prince's ferocious expression, he was certain that if the third prince was not severely injured and could still use his human emperor's power, he would definitely kill Flay with one move without hesitation. Before this, Jilin simply could not imagine that the third young master, who was as gentle as jade and as gentle as the spring breeze, could actually be so ferocious. It looked like the hatred humans had for traitors surpassed all enemies. In this regard, humans were no different from other races. Guarding Calm Wind Pass was never my responsibility. That was the responsibility of the Divine Dragon Empire's Calm Wind Pass. I only went there to help. How did the fall of Calm Wind Pass become my responsibility? Flay said coldly. Furthermore, it is precisely because I did something outside of my responsibilities that people gave me the title of a hero. Isn't that right? What's more, where did that come from? Although I had left the human camp at that time, I had never attacked Calm Wind Pass. From the moment the Red Dragon God descended, Calm Wind Pass no longer had any meaning to defend. They should join me and join the Red Dragon God. Jilin nodded silently, feeling that this person had finally said something that suited him. Flay, the human race once bestowed upon you the highest honor. The humans even worshipped you as a god. That's the result of my hard work in cultivation. What people worship is not me, but my legendary realm. That is the blind worship of humans for the strong. That's why I said that glory and reputation are all false. Then I'd like to ask, if this is a fabrication, then what can Brother Long give you that is real? Jilin also looked at Flay. He also wanted to know the answer to this question. The Red Dragon God can guide me further on the path of fire, Flay said. For a moment, the legendary champion's eyes became hazy, as if covered by a thin layer of mist. Under the mist, there was a radiance full of longing and a beautiful world that could not be seen clearly, as if it had been reborn. Jilin looked at Flay's back and thought that there was no problem with this. The third prince saw Flay's gaze and thought that this woman seemed to have gone crazy. You only want to improve your realm. That's all. That's all. For your own benefits, you don't hesitate to help the evildoer and go against your own race. You are extremely shameless. The third prince didn't really learn how to curse others. Moreover, his status was extraordinary. Even when he was hanging around in Spring Wind Restaurant, others knew to avoid him when they spoke vulgar words. They didn't want to sully the ears of the empire's princes and offend the nobles. Now, the third prince wanted to curse out loud. However, after racking his brains for a long time and using all that he had learned, he only managed to force out such a superficial sentence. Even Jilin felt that it was too horrible to look at. Flay felt that it was funny. I helped the evildoer? From what I know, didn't you also rely on the Red Dragon God's help to ascend to the throne of the Middle Empire? What right do you have to criticize me? As for being shameless, isn't this your family's inheritance? The Middle Empire's royal family has always been benevolent and respectful. How many of them can ascend to the throne peacefully? Even though their morals have declined to this extent, they still ruled the Middle Empire for thousands of years. Can only family's people still call others shameless? Jilin looked at the third prince sympathetically. He thought that the moment he decided to curse others, he had already lost. That wasn't something he was good at. How could he not lose when he used his weakness to attack the enemy's strength? Moreover, if you want to curse others, you have to expose their weakness. You aren't familiar with Flay and only know about the Calm Wind Pass. What weakness do you have to expose? Look at you. Everyone knows about your family's matters, and you are especially vicious. Third young master was also dumbfounded. When had anyone ever pointed out their family's matters to their face? Who didn't give face to the Middle Empire's royal family? Who was willing to completely fall out with the Li family? Even when the Southern Exine Empire was at war with the Middle Empire, the Zhan family had sent many congratulatory gifts to the Li family during the Middle Empire's holidays. The Li family even had to send back a letter of thanks personally written by the Ministry of Rights. After that, they continued to fight the war. Until today, there was finally someone who didn't care about the Middle Empire at all. She was still so outspoken and unscrupulous. The third prince suddenly realized that he had violated a rule that he had set 20 years ago. That was to not quarrel with women. Back then, the third prince was still considered young. He had seen how good the sisters in Spring Breeze Restaurant were doing this. Even if they didn't have any reason to, they could still speak with confidence. They could make a bunch of men look ashamed and lose their temper. Now, Flay could be considered to have reason and evidence. As for him, he had a huge flaw. The third prince looked at Flay. For the first time, he had the thought, if only I hadn't inherited the throne back then. If he was still drinking in Spring Breeze Restaurant, and heard Flay pointing out the Leaf family's bad habits. He could have invited her to drink and scolded his family's ancestors and relatives with her. He could have scolded them to his heart's content, as if his surname wasn't Lee. He could have said that he didn't want to associate with those people and hated his background. That was why he came out to drink to drown his sorrows. However, he couldn't do that now. Now he was the Golden King. Everything in the Leaf family belonged to him. He was the Leaf family. Now, as the third prince of the Leaf family, he could only be speechless when faced with Flay's accusations. "Why aren't you all leaving?" Flay looked at the Church of Light's believers on the side of the road. The Church of Light's believers, who had been standing there since an unknown time and didn't move forward, also remained silent. No one paid attention to Flay's words. Similarly, no one moved in the slightest. It was as if they had suddenly died together. It was as if they had suddenly turned into a real stone wall. This kind of silence was different from the third prince's silence. The third prince's silence meant that he had given up. Their silence also meant that they persisted and wouldn't change even if they died. Flay sighed in her heart. She thought that people with firm beliefs were the most troublesome. However, she suddenly forgot that she was also a member of the church. In the eyes of the people on the third prince's side, she was also troublesome. Chapter 412. Flay excitedly wanted to destroy the human wall in front of her. As a legend, it was rare for her to be so excited. It was impossible for her not to be excited. This was the first time Jilin had asked her to do something. For Flay, this was a historical moment worth remembering. At this moment, even Jilin felt that her enthusiasm was somewhat scorching. "Give the human emperor some face," Jilin suddenly said. "Don't kill them all." The flames in Flay's hands instantly weakened. Actually, Jilin was not thinking of giving face to the human emperor. Instead, he was thinking of giving face to Staya, who was lying not far away. "Yes, my God." Flay held the flames in her hands and opened her arms. She pounced toward the white human wall like a giant bird. This kind of combat behavior was a little too cautious for Flay. As the number one fire mage of the human race, Flay could destroy all obstacles in front of her with a single spell. She only needed to move her fingers. She did not even need to move her legs. Such a short distance was like nothing to a mage. However, she took the initiative to choose close combat, which was disadvantageous for mages. It was as if she wanted to use all her strength to defeat the human wall one by one. Of course, this was not because every mage has a dream of close combat. Instead, it was because Jilin's request was a little difficult for her. She had no choice but to be this cautious. Showing mercy to ordinary people and making them lose their ability to fight but not kill them was also a difficult task for Flay. This was because fire was recognized as the element that was the most difficult to control. Facing Flay's attack, the people of the Church of Light still did not move. This was because the difference in power between them was too great. It was meaningless for them to resist. They only stood there resolutely without moving. The people of the Church of Light could be so resolute in the face of death because they were already prepared. After all, their original opponent was Jilin. They had already planned to use their lives to show their unyielding attitude and protect the Saint's coffin. Even if they were not strong enough to protect the Saint's coffin, at the very least, they could protect the face of the Church of Light. The Saint's coffin had been taken away by the Red Disaster without a single drop of blood. This was undoubtedly a great loss of face for the Church of Light. However, if more than 100 believers of the Church of Light risked their lives to resist the Red Calamity and were defeated in the end, allowing the Red Calamity to take away the coffin, it didn't sound like a loss of face. Even though the result was the same, humans often valued the process more than anything else. For this process, countless believers of the Church of Light were willing to sacrifice their lives. It was all for the sake of making things look better in the first place. And the paint used for the decoration was undoubtedly their blood. The prestige and dignity of the Church of Light was built up by generations of fearless believers. In fact, this was also the case for most of the major human forces. Jilin might spend his entire life trying to understand the inexplicable motives of human beings, because face was something that only existed in human imagination. There was no such thing in the real world. However, humans valued them very much. Sometimes, these illusory things were even more important than their own lives. This was because humans lived in their own imagination. Religion, money, glory, these were all human imagination. They could even be said to be humans' greatest inventions. Jilin liked gold and treasures because they were extremely dazzling. They sparkled because of the nature of the dragon race. As for humans, they liked gold because they liked the fact that it could be used to exchange for all materials. When Jilin saw that the human wall was still motionless, he couldn't help but sigh. He felt that these people were all crazy. Flay instantly approached the wall. She watched as the flames were about to engulf the white wall, and Light was about to be humiliated. But at this moment, a dazzling white light suddenly appeared in the darkness of the passage. The white light was so sudden and dazzling. It was like the first white light in the endless darkness before the universe was born. It tore apart the original world and illuminated the endless darkness. Everyone couldn't help but close their eyes, except for Jilin and the third prince. Even Flay couldn't help but turn her head. When the white light disappeared, a tall and handsome young man with white hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes appeared between Flay and the human wall. He was wearing a gorgeous and holy robe. There was only one of its kind in the world. The Pope's hand shone with holy light and resisted Flay's flames. A faint smile appeared at the corners of Flay's mouth. Her beautiful face became valiant and formidable. The human race's #1 light magician. I have long wanted to compete with you. The Pope was startled. Many years ago, he indeed had such a title. But ever since he became the Pope, no one had called him that. If Flay hadn't mentioned it, he wouldn't have remembered it. Little girl, you are still a legend realm expert. How can you bully the weak like this? The great light technique flickered in the Pope's hand. Not only did it block Flay's flames, it even seemed like he was handling it with ease. Your rotten rules should have been changed long ago. Flay snorted disdainfully at the Pope's words. However, she didn't have any opinion about the Pope calling her a little girl, because that was the truth. The Pope had dominated the continent for many years. He was more than 200 years old. As for her, she was the continent's youngest legend realm expert and a true exceptional genius. She was only 40 years old. Disregarding everything else, it was appropriate for her to call the Pope Grandpa. Moreover, from legend realm experts to rural women, which woman would have any opinion about being called younger? When Jilin saw the Pope, he recalled who this person was and fiercely clicked his tongue. He felt that this matter was somewhat troublesome. Currently, the dwarves in the Red Dragon Palace were able to mass-produce protective talismans against the cold with the help of Aisha. However, the Red faction and the humans didn't have any open communication channels. Thus, how to give these protective talismans to the humans became a problem. Then, the Pope took on this heavy responsibility due to some special reasons. Now, the Pope frequently traveled between the Red Dragon Palace and the Wind Moon City. Change the rotten rules. The Pope shook his head and laughed. Every generation of youngsters has this idea. There are no exceptions. However, do you know what their results are? The Pope looked at Flay and said seriously, they failed because of the rotten old man's oppression. No. The Pope shook his head repeatedly. Truly mature and wise old men won't oppose youngsters. That's because their time is precious and there is no need for them to do such things. Then why is the world always the same? That's because youngsters will quickly grow old. Time will change their standpoint and thoughts, turning them into the rotten old men you speak of. There are no exceptions to this. Chapter 413. Flay looked at the Pope. She instinctively wanted to refute him, but in the end, she did not say anything, because what the Pope said was too reasonable. It was as if time would only move forward. There was no way to refute him. No matter how unbridled and unrestrained the young people were, no matter how elegant they were, no matter how much they talked with their friends, no matter how much they talked about the world and how much they talked about it, they would eventually grow old. They would become old-timers who adhered to the rules and believed in tradition. This was something that could not be changed unless time went back. Yes, when a young people who hoped to change the world continuously became old-timers who protected the old world under the influence of time, then no one could change the world. Because the time it took for people to grow old was always longer than when they were young. Jilin could understand why Flay was so speechless. Even though humans also had extremely romantic and stubborn sayings like, dying in a dream is the only way to fall into old age. But the problem was, most humans did not have dreams. Even if they had dreams, they would disappear like bubbles under the sun when they entered their youth due to the various obstacles in life. When humans were young, they would have all kinds of dreams. They would be writers, inventors, scientists, but once they reached their youth, if you asked them what their dreams were, most of them would be concise and comprehensive. They would tell you straightforwardly, earn money. This kind of straightforwardness and lack of thought was so sad. Humans were tormented by the hardships of life. They lost hope in the future and were like walking corpses. They were not afraid to show their dead souls to others because they felt that it was natural. They worked hard for money all day long. Under the heavy pressure of life, they had to bend their backs and endure humiliation. They would swallow their sweat and tears with a smile on their faces. They felt that this was maturity. Perhaps they would not say it so bluntly, but it could be summed up in the same meaning. Raising a family, buying a house, not having to worry about food and clothing, and becoming rich, according to Steyer's words, humans were creatures with endless possibilities. How could they not have dreams? How could they become so sad? The humans in the world were like sand in a muddy river. They cannot be counted. Every single one of them was different. Every single one of them had their own unique way of thinking. Every single one of them had their own unique growth environment. But they lived roughly the same life irrationally. They were born, grew up, started a family, reproduced. Day after day, death. If a human's life could be summed up to this point, perhaps 9,990 out of 10,000 people would live such a life. The remaining 10 people were either successful in their careers or had seen through the mundane world. But why? There were so many different people. How could they all live the same life? The answer was simple. There were only a handful of people who had achieved their dreams and stood above the rest of humanity. They obtained what most people could only dream of: wealth and power. They used this power to chart the course of the remaining humans' lives. They tried their best to make them serve them for the rest of their lives, squeezing their value. And in the life that the superior had planned for them, there was no room for something as illusory as dreams to survive. They could only move forward to make a living. Simply put, humans had robbed humans of their ability to dream, because that kind of ability was too dangerous for the human society that pursued stability and peace. The upper echelons had built a pyramid-like social structure. They stood at the top and were in high spirits, pointing at the world. Beneath his feet stood a multitude of living beings. In this kind of situation, the upper echelons naturally would not allow this imaginary pyramid to shake or even collapse, because they would fall from the top and instantly be smashed to pieces. So, they used the power in their hands to suppress the dreams of the lower echelons and stabilize society. And the few lower echelons who had dreams wanted to change the situation. They needed to climb up first and obtain the ability to change the situation. When they finally stood at the top after spending half of their lives and obtained power and power, they suddenly realized that they were already old. They did not have time to do something as important as changing the structure of society. And for the current them, there was no need for them to do so. So, their goal changed from changing the structure of society to protecting the power and power that they had already obtained. There was no need for hesitation at all. The old young man turned around and joined the original group of upper echelons. He began his mission of stabilizing the structure of society as a superior. This was an unsolvable cycle. It was difficult for anyone to break free from this cycle. This was something that humans had created for themselves. It was like a game of fate. Flay understood all of this because she was the one who benefited from the structure of human society. She stood at the top of human society and was worshipped by countless humans. The reason why she still had the heart to change the world was that she had climbed up too quickly and did not have the time to grow old. She was still full of lofty aspirations and truly believed that all living things were equal. She wanted to let all living things return to nature. She felt that she was born to do this. It only took her 40 years to reach the top of the human race. She had used 40 years to complete the journey that others had taken 60 years to complete. In that case, would she be able to complete the journey that others had taken 100 years to complete in 60 years? In that case, would she be able to reach the true peak in her lifetime? With his own strength, he could destroy the entire social structure of a human race. This was what Flay thought when she was young. This was why she had hibernated in the divine dragon empire's Tower of Knowledge for many years and had not come out. She had wholeheartedly studied the path of fire. She had dedicated her most beautiful years as a human to her own ideals. However, when Flay truly stood at a certain height, she realized something. The imaginary pyramid that humans had created did not have a tip. That position only existed in theory. She would not be able to reach it in her lifetime. Only a few people at the top decided the world's major events. They restrained each other, but they also tacitly maintained the balance between them. This situation caused Flay to feel despair from the bottom of her heart. Flay admitted that she was powerless to break the balance formed by many legends and emperors. She might be stronger than them. She might even stand above them in the future. However, they would not allow her to grow to that stage. When she recognized this fact, she felt that her life no longer had any meaning. Until Jilin appeared. Jilin's godlike flame power was the hope in Flay's heart. It was the first ray of light in the eternal darkness. This was truly a power that could destroy the entire pyramid of the human race on its own. Flay once again saw hope. This was the hope that Jilin gave her. Therefore, Jilin was her god. She wanted to ask for God's help. She wanted to destroy the order that humans originally had. She wanted to build a new world. This was the belief of the Red Dragon Society. Chapter 414. As the leader of the Red Dragon religion, Flay also understood the nature of the Church of Light. She also understood what God was and what the true relationship between humans and God was. Flay clearly knew that if humans wanted to obtain God's help, they couldn't just rely on pious prayers. They also had to demonstrate their worth to God. This was why Flay's fighting spirit was high. Even if the Sword Saint and the King of Fighters were here, she would still fight with all her strength, let alone the Pope and a few believers of the Church of Light. She was fearless. The scorching red light and the gentle white light shone in the dark tunnel. The two were in conflict with each other, suppressing each other. They were both light, but they were clearly separated. This was the confrontation between the Pope and Flay. It seemed peaceful, but it was actually extremely dangerous. It was like a turbulent undercurrent under the calm surface of the sea. Slowly, Flay's smooth forehead started to drip with cold sweat. The white light started to suppress the red flames. The Pope clearly had the upper hand. The Pope's white holy light enveloped Flay's red flames. Flay's flames immediately became like candlelight in the wind, swaying and faintly discernible. Flay seemed to have used up all her strength just to maintain the flames. No one knew what kind of dangerous confrontation had happened between the two greatest spellcasters in the light and fire domains in such a short period of time. It seemed like the two of them had only raised their hands to face each other. After that, they didn't move, and the victor was about to be decided. This was too inconceivable for legends. The duration of this confrontation was too short. Not to mention legends, even if powerhouses of the 8th or 9th step fought each other, it was normal for them to fight for a day or two. No one expected that the confrontation between Flay and the Pope would end so quickly. But this was only the most superficial appearance of the matter. In reality, the two of them had already exchanged countless high-level spells in such a short period of time. It was just that the power of these spells was canceled out by each other. This was why they couldn't reveal themselves. If the two of them accidentally leaked a single spell, a huge hole would be created in Wind Moon City. Flay couldn't hold on much longer. Even if her fighting spirit was high, this was still a natural outcome. Even though she was known as the legend with the greatest talent and was extremely talented. However, those who could become legends were also the ones with the greatest talent. He was not much worse than her, just a hair's breadth away. The Sword Saint had once said, I have roamed the world for many years and can be said to have seen many things. However, when it comes to talent in the way of the sword, I have never seen anyone who can surpass me." Although these words sounded stupid and made people speechless, because it was said by the sword's saint, the whole world tacitly agreed. It was the same for the Pope. He was also the chosen one. More than 200 years ago, the Pope was regarded as the most suitable person for light magic and was valued by the Church of Light. He was heavily groomed and cultivated in the most orthodox and profound great light magic of the Church of Light. The Pope, who had recklessly used the resources of the greatest religion in the world and had cultivated for more than 200 years, was naturally much stronger than Flay, who was only in her 40s. How could 100 years of time be erased by humans? Previously, Flay had said that she wanted to overthrow the order of the human race, the upper and lower classes. The Pope felt that it was impossible for her to complete it, because he was once young and had such a silly period. At that time, as the Pope, he actually doubted the faith of the God of Light. He also wanted to destroy this world filled with darkness. He tried, and he failed. That was why he felt that it was impossible. But the reason was not only that young people will grow old. There was another reason, but even the Pope, who had a lively temperament, could not say it out loud. That was, old people are often more powerful than young people. It was because of the passage of time. Of course, this strength did not refer to physical strength. These words were very reasonable. However, as one of the two oldest humans, the Pope could not help but feel that he was blowing his own trumpet. The Pope was not afraid of this. He often blew his own trumpet, and most people believed it to be true. The reason why he did not say it now was mainly because there was a risk of being slapped in the face if he boasted before the fight. After all, his opponent was a legend. Even if the Pope felt that he had a high chance of winning, he did not have absolute confidence in winning. After all, the Pope had lived for more than 200 years. He had seen too many monstrous geniuses, just like the king of fighters and the sword saint. The two of them had left a deep impression on him. In front of those two, he could only act as a support. The two of them had walked their own dais. Fortunately, Flay did not. Flay and the Pope could be considered to have walked the same path. This was also the reason why she was defeated so easily. On the same path, the one who walked further would naturally be more powerful. It was straightforward, and it was clear at a glance. The holy light started to press forward. Flay's arms started to bend. "You're going too far," Jilin said angrily when he saw this scene. The third prince raised his head and cast a glance at him. He did not know what Jilin was talking about. "What are you thinking?" Jilin turned his head and looked at the shadow at the corner of the tunnel. He spoke in a low voice. The third prince was a little confused. He blinked and followed Jilin's line of sight to look at the shadow. There was nothing there. It was just a shadow at the corner of the tunnel. It was an ordinary corner. However, Jilin stared at that ordinary corner and even muttered something. It seemed a little gloomy. Just when the third prince was surprised, the shadow suddenly started to move. It was like a breeze blowing across a mirror-like lake. It was also like the wind blowing across a quiet and flat piece of black cloth. The third prince was shocked. If this was somewhere in the Middle Empire, he would definitely not be like this. That was because the Middle Empires still used candles on a large scale. It was normal for the shadow to move when using those things to illuminate the area. It was just a matter of a gust of wind. However, this was the Snow Wind Empire, and it was the capital of the Snow Wind Empire. It was an extremely important secret tunnel in the Wind Moon City. It was impossible for the wind to move any of the lamps here. Moreover, there was no wind here. The shadow kept moving under the shocked gaze of the third prince. In the end, it really turned into a real black cloth. The black cloth slowly floated out. It was like the darkness separated from the darkness. The third prince almost thought that he had bumped into a ghost. However, he was not the same as he was many years ago. His current strength was extremely high. He could even exchange a few blows with Jilin. Therefore, he could still force himself to calm down. The third prince focused his gaze. It turned out that Aisha, who was wearing a black robe, was walking out from the shadow. The third prince let out a sigh of relief. However, a series of questions immediately appeared in his mind. When did Aisha know how to walk through walls? Do you also want to stop me? Jilin looked at Aisha and asked. At the same time, he turned around and glared at the Pope. A golden light flashed in Jilin's eyes. The Pope's body immediately shook. The great light technique suddenly stopped. The holy light in the Pope's hand was instantly cut off. The red light in Flay's hand also instantly dissipated. Flay's magic disappeared because she used fire magic. If Jilin wanted to dissipate it, he only needed a thought. The disappearance of the Pope's magic was due to the golden eye technique passed down by the Crimson Jilin bloodline. This was the strongest eye technique of the Golden Dragon bloodline. It could make all living beings unable to use magic. They could only fight against the Golden Dragon's physical body. The Golden Dragon could not control any elements. At the same time, it was also the dragon bloodline with the strongest physical body. Therefore, the Golden Dragon's status in the dragon race was only below the Black Dragon King. Of course, such a powerful technique did not come without conditions. Currently, Jilin was too young. This eye technique could only be used on humans who were much weaker than him for a short period of time. If it was the Golden Dragon King, he could use it on gods and maintain the duration of the great battle of the gods. Jilin only used a glance to stop the battle between the two legends. This was because Aisha had already arrived. He could not let the Pope kill Flay. At the same time, he could not kill the Pope in front of Aisha. This was why he used the eye technique that he rarely used. However, Aisha's appearance made him feel somewhat troubled. Her relationship with Staya sometimes gave him a headache. However, he was not like Bane, who always overestimated himself and tried to mediate between them. His method of dealing with things was simple and crude. He pretended not to hear anything. However, the stone coffin beside Jilin's hand clearly showed that this method would not work today. Chapter 415. Tisk tsk tisk. Aisha lowered her head and walked around Staya's coffin 3 times. She even used her fingers to slowly stroke the surface of the coffin, carefully feeling the cold, warm, and jade-like texture. It was indeed the best white marble, and the craftsmanship of the carving craftsman could be said to be superb and impeccable. Even the connection between the relief and the stone surface did not have the slightest rough feeling. This was a place that took a lot of effort and time. This place was well done, which showed that the craftsmen were very attentive. This was a work of art. Aisha concluded in her heart. Aisha shook her head and thought that it was no wonder that the witches were no match for the Church of Light. Look at them. They made such a big show after the death of the Saintess. Look at the witches. Even if Aisha died, they just burned her body in a fire. They did not even bury her and did not even have an urn for her ashes. They just left it there and scattered it with the wind. They even said that it was returning to nature to pay tribute to the witches who were burned to death in the Dark Age. It was ridiculous that the witches who believe in the god of darkness would actually name that painful period as the Dark Age. But anyway, the way the witches died was extremely shabby compared to the Church of Light. Although it did sound a little free and easy, it really did not have any extravagance to speak of. Aisha looked at Staya's coffin in a daze. Jilin opened his eyes wide, bent his knees slightly, and slightly raised his hands to his waist. He looked at Aisha without blinking. He opened his eyes wide because he was afraid that he would miss any small movements of Aisha. His knees were slightly bent so that he could move faster. Put his hands to his waist because it was the best position to attack. Jilin looked at Aisha with full concentration. In this world, there was no creature that could make him so careful and carefully observe. Even when he was fighting with the Elf Queen, Jilin was not so careful. At that time, he just swung the dragon scale sword without caring about anything else. Jilin was afraid that Aisha would do something that even he couldn't undo in the next moment. Given the relationship between witches and the Church of Light, Jilin felt that Aisha had a reason to do so. Aisha stared at Staya's coffin very carefully. She couldn't wait to see the patterns inch by inch. In the eyes of the bystanders, that gaze was so greedy and malicious. Even Jilin was a little nervous, let alone the believers of the Church of Light. Previously, when they faced Jilin and Flay, They didn't move at all and treated themselves like a real stone wall. However, when Aisha appeared in front of them and observed Staya's coffin, the devout believers could no longer suppress their anger. The solid white stone wall began to loosen because the stones that made it up wanted to move. They wanted to smash the blackness to pieces. Fortunately, the Pope raised a hand in time to stop this restless movement. "Aisha," the Pope said. Aisha raised her head and looked at the Pope. The Pope's back was facing the believers of light. His white figure was so tall in the eyes of the believers because he had blocked the red disaster, the legendary flay for them. Now, there was also the enemy that the Church of Light hated the most. They had always wanted to kill, but had never been able to do so. That seemingly eternal darkness, Aisha. But in the front where they couldn't see, the Pope's eyes were really blinking madly at Aisha. His eyebrows were fluttering like willow leaves in the wind. However, these actions were seen by Jilin, who was standing in front of the Pope. Jilin knew that this kind of blinking action was called hinting. In layman's terms, it was called sending a glance. Humans could use this kind of obscure expression to convey some simple information. Jilin felt that this kind of action was a little strange. It was a little troublesome and unrewarding. This was because the eyelids and eyebrows weren't supposed to be responsible for the information at the bottom of the ship. They were doing things that they couldn't do. It was a miracle that they did it well. It was natural that they couldn't do it well. Therefore, humans often used this kind of method to convey some wrong information, resulting in many unexpected situations. However, for some reason, humans didn't care about this at all. They even enjoyed it. Most of the misunderstandings in human history originated from this. Jilin couldn't understand the Pope's gaze because the Pope's expression was too rich. He was beaming with joy and didn't stop. Generally speaking, gaze could only convey the simplest and most understandable information. Doubt, shock, fear. However, the Pope's gaze seemed to be very different. He seemed to want to convey a lot of information. It was very complicated. It seemed like a poem, but more like a song. All right, Jilin admitted that he didn't understand it. However, when Jilin turned to look at Aisha, he found that Aisha seemed to understand. Aisha looked at Jilin. "Do you know what's engraved on these coffins?" Jilin's eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his neck back and raised his head slightly. If Jilin was in his dragon body at this time, this series of actions meant that he was serious. However, using his current body to do it, it seemed a little funny. However, it didn't matter. Aisha could understand what he meant. "Let's not talk about the Statue of Light. The Church of Light's coffins have them." Aisha began to speak tirelessly. Jilin listened carefully. However, the Church of Light side was a little out of control. They suddenly became agitated and indignant. What did Aisha mean by this? Could it be that she had seen many coffins in the Church of Light? Actually, everything else is easy to explain. Every generation of saintess coffins have similar engravings on them, Aisha said as she walked. She only stopped when she reached the side that was engraved with birds and beasts. Looking at the phoenix that soared above all living beings, she said slowly, "The problem is this thousand spirit picture. The meaning of this picture is to let the creatures in the picture accompany the person in the coffin to the other world, so that the road will no longer be cold and silent." "What's the problem?" Jilin asked in a low voice. Jilin didn't find any problem. Although what Aisha said was impossible and absurd, it was very human. "The problem is that there's no one who draws a phoenix on a coffin," Aisha said. "Phoenixes are immortal in the eyes of humans. Why would such a creature be drawn on a coffin?" Jilin was stunned. Looking at the flames on the phoenix, he felt that there was no problem. Isn't it to entrust the wish of being reborn from the ashes? Aisha shook her head. "No, a special picture like this. Its purpose is to record the special identity and achievements of the person in the coffin when they were alive. The phoenix symbolizes Staya's identity as the queen of the Semite Empire. And the flames on the phoenix." Aisha suddenly paused. After a short silence, she looked at Jilin and said, "That's your flame. It represents Staya's great achievement in defeating the red disaster. She snatched your flame and put it on herself to show off her unparalleled might and power." Jilin was silent. It was easy to understand the situation. Giving honor to the dead was a common method used by humans. But Aisha's rare, serious tone made him realize that things weren't that simple. Sure enough, Aisha changed the topic and looked at Crimson Lynn with a slightly playful expression. If we say that this phoenix with fire on its body is a posthumous honor bestowed upon Staya because she killed you, then, since you're still alive, why do you think these people would rather die than leave this meaningless coffin and corpse? Jilin was stunned, and his heart turned cold. His eyes slowly scanned the believers of the Church of Light and became as cold and sharp as a knife. He had some judgments and guesses, but he didn't want to admit them. Chapter 416. What? Jilin asked in return. His heart was burning like a fire, and there were countless thoughts in his mind, but only this one dry sentence came out of his mouth. Like countless humans, there were thousands of words that they wanted to say every day, but none of them could really say it out loud. Most of the words that they said were not sincere, and most of them were just pretending to be crazy and making jokes. It was just a bunch of meaningless nonsense. Most of the true words could only be kept in their stomachs and would never see the light of day. Finally, one day, even he would forget about those things. Aisha sighed softly. Jilin's reaction was already very human-like. He was the kind of person who was extremely awkward and not likable. Why do they want to take back the coffin? Aisha said, because they want to make up for their mistakes. They want to cut the phoenix that symbolizes glory and achievement from the coffin. Cluck, cluck, cluck. A clear and painful sound was heard. Aisha blinked and quietly took 2 steps back. It was not the sound of stones falling to the ground. It was Jilin's teeth chattering. Jilin felt his teeth itching and suddenly wanted to find something to grind his teeth. This was the expression of extreme anger of the dragon race and represented their uncontrollable destructive instinct. If this problem was on a dog, it would be easy to solve. He just needed to give it a bone. It didn't matter if there was meat or not. But if the dragon's teeth itched, then his bone might be a house, a street, or a city. Jilin did not know why he was so angry. There was nothing wrong with what the humans did, and it was even justified. It was indeed Staya who deceived the humans, and the humans just want to take back the glory that did not belong to her, but had given her. Jilin understood. He was angry at the narrow-mindedness of the humans. In his heart, Staya was definitely worthy of this glory. She was so bright and righteous, as if she was the embodiment of all virtues. Even Jilin thought so. She was so good. She had everything that ordinary people could only dream of having, but she didn't have the slightest attachment to these things. When disaster struck, she still stood at the forefront of humanity without hesitation. In order to shelter the entire human race from the wind and rain, he seemed to want to shelter all the humans behind him. Even Staya was weak in Jilin's eyes. Staya is worth it. She deserved all the glory that man could imagine. However, the humans under her protection did not seem to think so. She had already done so much for humanity. She had given up her life for humanity. She had benefited the whole human race, but the human race found fault with her for trivial things. He was so harsh and cold that even Jilin felt a chill in his heart. Jilin did not understand the standards that humans had for others. They are strict with good people and tolerant with bad people. A good person could do 100 good things, but if he did only one bad thing, he would be despised and blamed by others. Bad people did 10,000 bad things, but doing one good thing seemed to be able to gain forgiveness and understanding. A saint who had lived a flawless life could become the most conspicuous stain in his life because of a wrong thought. In the eyes of the world, he was like a flawless white jade that had a piece of black, which made people sigh. He had done good things in his life and was fair and selfless. However, he suddenly changed from a righteous gentleman to a wretched villain who fished for fame. There was no such thing as the flaw does not cover the jade on him. People would regretfully judge him as 1,000 years of merit scattered in a day. But the bad guy was much more comfortable. He had done all the bad things in his life, but because of a moment of conscience, he did a few good things casually. He might be forgiven and praised by others. People would think that even a person like him could not hide the glory of humanity. They would also suddenly understand why he did those heartless things. They would suddenly put themselves in his shoes and empathize with him. They would start to find reasons for the bad guy to do bad things. What people had no choice in the world. What people had no choice. What people would do if they were in his shoes. When people forgave the bad guy, they would change their words to judge him. A prodigal who repents is worth more than gold. Everyone makes mistakes. Humans were harsh to those who were good to them. Being tolerant to those who hurt them was like the warm sun in spring. This was the standard cheap. Jilin didn't know which wise man had come up with this term. It was so vivid and could make people feel so comfortable. Jilin glanced at Aisha and suddenly thanked her for teaching him this word. Staya would never have taught him such a thing, as if she had never known it herself. In fact, Jilin knew why the standards of humans had changed so thoroughly and so decisively. Why could humans feel empathy for bad people, but not for saints? Because most humans felt that they had the possibility of becoming a bad person, but had no hope of becoming a saint. Being tolerant of the bad guys now might be forgiving of themselves in the future, and being tolerant of saints was not necessary at all. Since they wanted to be saints, they should have high standards and strict requirements. Therefore, in human society, good people were always at a disadvantage. This was because those who could become saints were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilean horns. And people who could become bad people, humans had the ability to do this easily. Humans also had literary descriptions of their different treatment. Heaven will give a great responsibility to, if you want to wear the crown, you must bear its weight. According to humans, Staya wore the crown, so she should bear its weight. But now they suddenly thought that Staya was not worthy of a crown, so they wanted to take it off her head. No, it should be taken off her body. Maybe Staya did not care. She had never looked up, and her crown was not in her eyes. She only had eyes for the people below her. But Jilin had her crown in his eyes. In Jilin's eyes, that thing was now one with her. Whoever wanted to touch, it wanted to be dismembered. Jilin looked at the seemingly holy people of the Church of Light, and a trace of red madness flashed through his golden pupils. Staya, these people want to desecrate your body. Even if you killed them, it would not be too much to burn their bones and scatter their ashes, right? Jilin had an answer as soon as he asked the question in his heart. No matter what happened, Staya would not let him kill those people, because she had died to protect them. This human society was really unfair. Good people gave everything, effort, time, and even their lives. But the results were usually very small, and only a few people could really get something in return. And the benefits that the bad people could get were countless times more than what they gave, not to mention those who really deceived the world. Until now, Jilin finally understood why humans always put their hope in the heavens. Why humans always said that good and evil would be rewarded, and that retribution would not be pleasant. And Jilin really hoped that what humans said was true. Chapter 417. Karma was the cycle of the heavens. From Jilin's perspective as an outsider, he naturally knew that this was just a beautiful, wishful thinking of human beings. It was a kind of self-comfort and deception. It was very obvious. If the world was really like this, if the heavens were really clear, then why didn't good people have good karma? Why did bad people always take advantage of everything? Why did loyal officials and brave generals always go to jail unjustly or fail to achieve their goals for the rest of their lives? Why could treacherous officials be high-spirited and stir up trouble in the court? Chu Yuan silently recited beside the Miluo River, long breath to cover the tears, lamenting the hardships of the people's lives. In the end, he jumped down. Shang Yang's reform made the Qin state the strongest among the 7 states. The world was unified, but in the end, Shang Yang was tragically torn apart. The god of war, Han Xian, took great credit for the establishment of the Han dynasty. In the end, he was humiliated and killed by a woman. Although Sima Qian had a book, Records of the Grand Historian, he also suffered the cruelest punishment in the world. Su Shi was originally a high-spirited and elegant young man like the moonlight. How did he later write the depressing cold food invitation? General Yu Fei was loyal to the country. He was invincible on the battlefield and invincible. As a general, he didn't die on the battlefield, but he couldn't resist the 12 gold medals. What kind of poverty did Du Fu experience to be able to write the song of the thatched cottage broken by the autumn wind? If there's really justice, how could it be like this? But human beings turn a blind eye to it. Some people shouted that justice was clear, but they did things that were intolerable. When they did bad things, did they have justice in their hearts? This kind of thing imagined by human beings only existed when human beings wanted to use it. Human beings were so contradictory and hypocritical that they could even deceive themselves when necessary. They could kowtow to the Buddha statue they created without any piety in their hearts. 3 kneels and 9 kowtows, prostrating themselves on the ground. Then they went out of the temple door to eat fish and meat. They completely forgot that Buddha was not allowed to eat meat. Wine and meat passed through the intestines, but Buddha stayed in the heart. There were such people. But this was a level that could only be achieved by people with a very high realm. There were even more people who could pass the wine and meat, but Buddha couldn't keep them. Jilin looked at the people from the Church of Light in front of him, feeling unwilling and puzzled. They were all from the same church, so how could there be such a huge difference? There was not even a trace of similarity, except that they were all wearing white. Jilin was burning with rage, as if he really wanted to transform into a calamity and burn this world. The third prince lowered his head and sat in silence. None of this was beyond his expectations. When Staya said she wanted Jilin to fight against the Demon King, he had expected this scene. Staya had sacrificed herself to save thousands of humans, but they would not give her the glory and would not accept it. They were more concerned that Staya had lied to them. Jilin was not dead. They didn't care how much Staya had sacrificed for them, because in their eyes, this was what Staya should do as the queen of the empire. This was the king's duty. People always had unusually high expectations for their superiors, and the third prince knew this very well. There was nothing perfect in the world, and there was no universal standard. Perfect things were not tolerated by the heavenly axiom, but people hoped that the king was perfect. You want to use a knife on Staya's coffin? Jilin looked at the Pope and asked with his head tilted. The Pope was also confused. He didn't think about this problem. He didn't care if Staya's coffin was carved with phoenixes or 10,000 dragons. He only thought about how to save these people from the Red Disaster. As for Staya's Holy Virgin coffin, if he could keep it, then he would. If he couldn't, then he didn't have to force it. Anyway, the Red Disaster wouldn't do anything to humiliate Staya. At least, these people wouldn't all die here. I didn't think so. The Pope shrugged. But I hope you can keep Staya's coffin. Why? This. The Pope took a deep breath and scratched his short silver hair. It seemed that Jilin's question troubled him, and he couldn't answer it. The sudden death of the Holy Virgin was also an extremely troublesome matter for the Church of Light. Not to mention, ever since Staya took over, the Church of Light's affairs had always been managed by Staya, and he, the Pope, didn't care much about it. Staya's death was sudden, and these affairs weren't handed over F***. The Pope sighed in his heart, as if he had given up. He decided to give up on this meaningless conversation. Staya's father, the wise king. The Pope paused slightly. He's my friend. His daughter suddenly died, and he didn't even get the news of Staya's death. Of course, I can't let him see his daughter's body for the last time before letting you take her away. Jilin's eyes narrowed abruptly. He was at a loss of what to do. Jilin came to a sudden realization and said in his heart, so this is the justice of the human race. His daughter died, and, as a father, he didn't even see her body. Of course, it was inappropriate. This kind of justice was much more powerful than any good and evil karma. This was the natural justice. Even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its cubs. Family, blood ties, these were indisputable. Even Jilin couldn't compete with it directly and could only settle for the next best thing. Many humans have opinions about Staya's coffin, so it can't fall into the hands of humans. Jilin said, I can take Staya's coffin to the sacred city and let the wise king see it, and then I'll take it away. Everyone was stunned. The air suddenly became deathly silent. Jilin was a fire dragon, but for some reason, it seemed like he suddenly had the ability to freeze the air. The temperature suddenly dropped to freezing point, and even the air froze. Everyone was shocked by Jilin's bold words and couldn't react for a moment. Everyone seemed to have become frogs that were suddenly shone on by a strong light. Pa! Aisha was the first to react, but even she couldn't help but slap her forehead. Because even if Jilin wasn't human, what he said was too inhumane. What did he mean? You're carrying the body of a girl in her 20s to see her father who's over 50 years old. After that, you're not going to return it to her. You're just going to let her take a look, and then you're going to take it away. At this moment, even Aisha couldn't understand Jilin's logic. Are you going to announce someone's death? Are you going to provoke them? Anyone would think that you were the one who killed Stee. Look, I killed your daughter, and if you want her body back, come find me at the Red Dragon Palace. Huh? What kind of typical villain's plot was this? You. The Pope pointed at Jilin and couldn't say anything for a long time. He had 1,000 things he wanted to say to Jilin. Are you *King kidding me? Are you an idiot? But considering Jilin's uniqueness, these words were swallowed back. You swore that you'd never step into the sacred city. A weak voice suddenly sounded from the wall, and Jilin paused. At the same time, it attracted everyone's attention. Bane slowly woke up. Chapter 418. Bane was hit by Jilin before. Because he didn't want to accept the fact that Staya was dead, he fainted. At this time, he woke up slowly, and his voice was just right. It happened to connect with Jilin's words. No matter how one looked at it, it was too much of a coincidence. So, there was only one possibility. Bane had woken up a long time ago. He just didn't want to wake up. If no one woke him up, he would pretend to be asleep. No matter what happened in this passage, he just leaned against the wall and didn't move. No matter what happened, it had nothing to do with him. The third prince was hit by Jilin, but he didn't react. He deserved it anyway. Jilin didn't save Staya because he was too far away. But the third prince didn't stop Sisu. That didn't make sense. In Bane's mind, the third prince almost watched Staya die. If it were someone else, it would be fine. But the third prince and Staya were friends, weren't they? When the third prince's two children, Li Wuyo and Li Wuyo, were born, Staya sent gifts. But what happened? The third prince had the power of the human emperor. He should be the most confident person in the world to stop Staya. Why couldn't he stop her? Wasn't it his responsibility to fight against the Devil King? Didn't he fight back and forth with Jilin? Why didn't he fight against the Devil King? How could he let Staya do something that he wasn't sure about? Bane had some resentment in his heart. So when he knew that the third prince was beaten so badly by Jilin, he was not only happy, but also happy. As for the Pope, Flay, and the followers of light, he was even less familiar with them. He didn't care about them. Anyway, he was too lazy to care about them. Only when Aisha appeared did he become nervous, just like Jilin. Although it was something that had long been expected, when the Pope appeared in front of Jilin, Aisha could not follow him. But when Aisha really appeared, Bane was still a loss. He didn't know what to do. It was as if he was faced with the problem of having to make a choice that most men would encounter. If your mother and I fall into the water, who will you save first? According to teacher Luo's explanation, saving anyone was right and saving anyone was wrong, but it did not constitute a crime. When faced with this kind of question, most men would be speechless. It looked like he was hesitating, but he wasn't. The man was silent at this moment. He was definitely not thinking about who to save first. He just wanted to curse, but he held it in. The answer to this question was obvious. Both the man and woman knew the answer long ago, but it would be very troublesome to tell the truth. Bane felt that his current situation was similar to this problem. The only solution seemed to be silence. But on second thought, Bane was relieved. Now that Jilin was holding the fort, even Aisha couldn't act recklessly. When he thought about how Staya and Aisha usually quarreled, he was in a dilemma. He couldn't persuade this or that, so he was anxious and sweating. And Jilin was looking up at the sky, turning a deaf ear to what was happening next to him. It was as if the dragon race's unparalleled sense of hearing had suddenly failed. When he decided to throw the question to Jilin, Bane suddenly felt a sense of pride in his heart. You also have such a day. Come on, You can try my feelings too. This is probably the last time. If I don't experience it now, I won't have the chance anymore. The corners of Bane's eyes suddenly became hot again. It was so hot that it was even a little hot. Some things were just like that. When you were in it, you were bored to death, but when you really lost it forever, you suddenly felt reluctant. That feeling came suddenly, and there seemed to be no transition in the middle. You suddenly realized what you were going to lose or what you had already lost. That kind of loss, as if your body and soul were missing a piece, and you never had the ability to get them back. Bane was immersed in pride and sudden sadness, but it didn't last long before he was shocked by Jilin's earth-shattering and shocking words. Bane really felt like he was struck by lightning. He couldn't pretend to be asleep anymore. Bane knew that if Jilin could say something like this, it meant that he could do something like this, and he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. He really thought that it was normal to bring Staya's coffin to the King of Sacred to take a look and then take it away. But in reality, that wasn't the case. At least, that wasn't what humans knew. If Jilin really did that, Bane was almost certain that the King of Sacred would fight him to the death. After all, Jilin was a dragon who had been to Sacred City once. Although Bane wasn't there at the time, there was no lack of legends about that day on the continent. People said that it was the day when light was invaded by darkness. That day, the saint ascended to the throne, and the Saimai Empire decorated Sacred City to be incomparably holy. It was a day of celebration, and even the sun was so bright. But suddenly, the red disaster came. He snatched the saintess and overturned the Sacred City. Everyone in the Sacred City was heartbroken. Human legends were best half true and half false, or else it wouldn't be easy to spread. But Bane was too familiar with Jilin, so he could tell which legends were true and which were false. After hearing dozens of related legends, Bane could naturally deduce what really happened that day. Then he could be sure that no matter how many trump cards the King of Sacred had, or how many people he had, he couldn't beat Jilin. At that time, the situation would become even uglier. That was the country of the Staya, the city of the Staya. Jilin had already caused it unforgettable damage. He couldn't hurt it again. Yes. Bane struggled to stand up with the help of the wall. Perhaps in terms of strength, he was insignificant here. Even if Jilin killed half of the people, and the rest chose from the highest to the lowest, half wouldn't be able to choose him. But in all senses of the word, he was one of the few people who had the right to speak here. Didn't you swear on your real name? Have you forgotten? Bane looked at Jilin and said, looking a little exhausted, "Are you going to break your oath? Or is it that the oath made by the dragon race doesn't count after the person dies?" Noble dragon race. Jilin looked at Bane, the light in his eyes burning. He was a little regretful. Why didn't he really knock Bane out? Actually, Staya, Bane, and even Aisha didn't know. The so-called swearing on the dragon race's real name was just something that Jilin thought was fun and cool, so he said it casually. Humans felt that once the dragon race made an oath, they would never go back on it. But this was just wishful thinking of humans. The dragon race didn't have any habits or rules that required them to keep their promises. The great Megalosaurus was never bound by oaths. There was nothing in the world that could bind the Megalosaurus. They did whatever they wanted. If they wanted to keep their oath, they would keep it. If they didn't want to keep it, they would pretend that they didn't say it. But it was true that the dragon race never lied, because they didn't care and didn't need to. But in Jilin's eyes, what he said to the humans wasn't a lie. At most, it was a harmless joke or a trick that the Megalosaurus played on the humans. But now that Bane mentioned this oath, Jilin wanted to keep it. Chapter 419. Bane gave Jilin a difficult problem, and Jilin didn't know how to solve it. But he didn't want to lose face at this time, so he decided to hold on. "You said my method won't work. Do you want me to give the coffin to the humans? These people want to peel off the phoenix on Staya's coffin, and you don't care?" Jilin's words didn't mean anything. It didn't solve the problem, nor did it eliminate the problem, but made Bane speechless. Bane was silent. He suddenly realized that this was a dilemma. It was impossible to let Jilin take Staya to Shengming City and then leave. The Shengming king would fight Jilin to the death. If Jilin didn't hold back and hurt Staya's father, that was impossible. But to let the humans take Staya, Jilin was unwilling. But how could Bane be willing? Staya was his savior, a ray of light in his spiritual world. She was his son. Bane's feelings toward Staya were one of reverence and yearning. Although he couldn't do it, he yearned for it. He wanted to be like Staya, but at the same time, he knew it was impossible. Bane felt that Staya deserved all the glory and light in the world. These people didn't understand, and they wanted to take away the phoenix on Staya's coffin. They didn't know what Staya had done for the humans. Bane was also unwilling. But to not let the humans take her away, the Shengming king had to take one last look at Staya. Bane looked at Jilin, and Jilin looked at Bane. They looked at each other silently. They weren't really looking at each other at the same time. They were just stuck in this problem at the same time. They couldn't do this, and they couldn't do that. The scene between the two of them was so strange that even Aisha couldn't stand it anymore. "Should I cast a spell on Staya's coffin?" Aisha said, "No matter who it is, as long as they touch the coffin, they will turn into a frog." Huh. The people of the Church of Light were in chaos again. How holy was the saint's coffin? How could it be tainted by dark magic? Jilin glanced at Aisha speechlessly. He didn't need anyone to tell him that this was very inappropriate. This woman was purely here to cause trouble. Bane sighed in his heart. That's not magic, that's a curse. And why did witches have the habit of turning people into frogs? Although your method is not advisable, Jilin said, the idea can be used for reference. I can bring the sacred coffin to the Shengming king, as long as no other humans touch it. How exactly? Bane asked hurriedly. He seemed to be very worried about Jilin, because Jilin seemed to be able to do something unexpected at any time. Easy, Jilin said. Jilin's fingers slowly touched the flames of the phoenix. There was a whoosh. The flames on the phoenix seemed to become real and move slowly with the wind. Aisha's eyes widened. Jilin's ability to make something real was like a miracle. She had never seen him have such an ability before. I'm just giving the burning ability to the fire sculpture. Jilin seemed to be indifferent. If it's just a fire sculpture, I can do this too. What's the use? Bane asked. Why don't you try with a sword? Jilin gestured. Bane didn't even think. A cold light flashed beside him, and a sharp sword flashed out from his waist. It pierced towards the coffin. Bane actually trusted Jilin. Since he asked him to try, he couldn't hurt the coffin at all. But Bane still wanted to experience it for himself. Bane's sword began to melt the moment it touched the coffin. The speed and ease of the melting made Bane feel nothing other than the weight in his hand becoming lighter. Bane almost thought that he was using a stick of lard to pierce a piece of red-hot iron. Sure, Bane threw away the sword that was left with only the hilt, because the hilt had also become hot. But what if the Shengming king and his wife want to touch the coffin? Bane asked. I'll make sure they don't get burned, Jilin said. Bane nodded and didn't say anything else. He even felt that it was rare for Jilin to be so considerate. Cough, cough. Suddenly, there was a cough. It was just that the cough was so fake that everyone knew what he meant. Jilin first glanced at Aisha, then looked at the Pope. Aisha also looked at the Pope with a hint of anxiety in her deep eyes. She didn't know why this person was making a sound now. The timing was so sensitive now, and he had blocked Jilin's legendary subordinates earlier. Right now, Jilin was definitely an active volcano that could erupt at any moment. The kind that could destroy a huge city with one eruption. But the Pope was still recklessly looking into the mouth of the volcano. Your Highness the Pope. Bane first sighed in his heart, then said. Jilin wouldn't speak first with normal people, and the relationship between Aisha and the Pope was too complicated. With so many people watching, only he could speak first. This kind of work used to be done by Staya. Is there anything else Your Highness the Pope wants? Could it be that you feel that there is something wrong with Jilin's decision? I would like to advise Your Highness the Pope to take a step back. It's not a bad idea. Bane's words were blunt, and there was even a hint of gunpowder in them. There were not many people in the world who dared to speak to a legendary like this. But Bane now had an active volcano behind him, so he naturally had the confidence to speak like this. Besides, Jilin was in a bad mood, but his mood wasn't good either. If Aisha wasn't still looking behind him, Bane's tone would have been even worse. I have no objection to the disposal of the holy coffin, the Pope said. And I don't want to talk at this moment, but I'm the Pope of the Church of Light after all. It's my duty, and some things have to be said and done, please understand. Although the Pope's words seemed to be directed at Bane, the Pope's eyes were always on Jilin. Speak. Jilin felt that this human was really long-winded. Since the body of the Sanus has been brought back by your Highness, there is something that I would like to ask your Highness. Where is the most precious treasure of the Church of Light, the Holy Book of Light? And where is the Holy Sword? Jilin was taken aback. Then, a raging inferno rose within him. Judging from the Pope's words, it seemed that he was suspecting that he had taken it. When had Jilin ever been humiliated like this? Uncontrollable anger suddenly rushed to the top of his head, and on the day that Staya had just died, these despicable humans were already thinking about his things. Jilin took a step forward and instantly arrived in front of the Pope. His right fist was completely rounded and smashed toward the Pope's head. He didn't hold back. Jilin's punch was filled with anger and also contained the domineering fist intent of the King of Fighters, pressing forward with indomitable will. In this world, except for the Devil King and the Elf Queen, there was probably no one who could remain unscathed under this punch. If the Pope was hit by this punch, he would probably end up with blood and flesh flying everywhere. However, just because he couldn't block it didn't mean that he couldn't dodge it. Jilin's extremely fast punch landed, but it actually hit nothing. The hard stone ground was smashed into a big pit by Jilin's punch. As for the Pope, he didn't move at all, but he teleported back 5 meters out of thin air. Aisha! Jilin's voice was as cold as hell. Chapter 420. Jilin's punch was extremely fast, and he did not hold back at all. It was extremely powerful, and it was not slow either. No, it should be said that it was faster than lightning, like thunder falling from the sky, arriving in an instant. Logically speaking, no one in the world could dodge this punch. They would only lose consciousness in a split second before they could even react to the situation. That was how it should be. However, Aisha was already prepared. Jilin was furious. In fact, this was not the first time Aisha had betrayed him. Aisha and the other two had all stood against Jilin before. It was just that Jilin did not care, because his position was too high, and he could see too clearly. Jilin felt that Staya stood on the side of the humans, and it was reasonable and natural. She was that kind of person. Aisha was even more so. She was someone who could betray her faith for him, let alone Jilin. These betrayals were not considered betrayals in Jilin's eyes. They just did what they should do. Only when Bane stole Lysana from the Red Dragon Palace did Jilin get angry. However, the news he received from the Fire Dragon King instantly made Jilin's anger disappear. This world would eventually explode because of him, so why should he care about the son of the dragon? They would eventually become cosmic dust with this world anyway, and they would not escape from this world. It was just a matter of time. This was also the main reason why Jilin did not bother with Bane anymore. However, until this time, Jilin finally felt that he had been betrayed. Jilin looked at Aisha and could not stop breathing. Jilin's anger was not light, but the humans were equally shocked. They were not happy that His Highness the Pope could still escape from the Red Disaster. They just could not understand why the Church of Light's mortal enemy would help His Highness the Pope. For a moment, these people had all kinds of thoughts in their minds. There were only a few who truly breathed a sigh of relief that the Pope was not in danger. Aisha. Jilin looked back and gritted his teeth. Aisha didn't say anything. She was indeed a person with no bottom line or standards. He gave people a feeling that he was capable of doing anything. But in fact, she had something that she couldn't give up no matter what. It was not just the Pope. The Pope was just a representative, a microcosm. What Aisha really couldn't let go of was her past when she was young. However, under the wash of time, everything in the world seemed too fragile and ethereal. Like words written on the beach, they were washed away by the waves of time and disappeared without a trace. Sometimes, when Aisha was in a trance, she even wondered if she had really experienced those things, because they had no basis and only existed in Aisha's memory. No one could prove that Aisha had ever existed, except for the Pope. That was why Aisha decided to make a move now. In the eyes of Aisha, who was a real old person, Flay's view was not correct. The reason why the old people suppressed the young people who tried to change the world was not because they wanted to protect their hard-earned power or status. Those things were meaningless to the old people who had seen the outline of death. What the old people really wanted to protect was their past. If you change the world, then what can you prove that I have lived and existed? But the humans present, except for the Pope, did not understand Aisha's thoughts. The Megalosaurus, who was too far away from death, did not understand either. He just felt very sullen. He really wanted to destroy something to vent his anger. The sudden voice caused Jilin's anger to change direction. Jilin turned his head and looked at the third prince. The third prince seemed to be a little hesitant, and his expression was a little ugly. It seemed like he was weighing the pros and cons in his heart for a long time. In the end, the third prince looked at the Pope and said with difficulty, I don't know if I should say something. The Pope had lived for so many years and had interacted with many people from the Middle Empire. He hated this sentence that people from the Middle Empire often said. I don't know if I should say something. He did not really mean to ask if he should say it. He did not even say it. So who knew if he should say it or not? What he meant was that he knew it was not appropriate to say it, but he had to say it. So he used this sentence to tell the people who heard it to be mentally prepared. The Pope did not know what the third prince wanted to say at this time, but he suddenly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, the third prince did not wait for the Pope's reply and continued to speak about the Holy Bible of Light and the Holy Sword. The Holy Queen has already made arrangements. What? She has already made arrangements. The Holy Queen, before the Pope could say anything, the believers of the Church of Light behind him could not hold back anymore. The Holy Queen had already made arrangements for the Holy Bible of Light when she was alive. She even left behind her last words to tell the Golden King. What did this mean? Did the Holy Queen think that the Holy Bible of Light and the Holy Sword belonged to her? The Holy Bible of Light was indeed used by the Holy Queen of each generation and was passed down from generation to generation. However, it was the most precious treasure of the Church of Light and should belong to the Church. This was something that was beyond doubt. The Holy Queen was only chosen by the Church to use the Holy Bible. She only had the right to use it, but not the right to dispose of it. What right did the Holy Queen have to write the Holy Bible of Light and the Holy Sword in her will and let the third prince, who is the emperor of mankind, witness it? The Pope was even more aware of the power of this and was stunned for a full 3 seconds. If Staya only wanted to return the Holy Bible of Light to the Church, there was no need to write a will. Therefore, if she wrote a will, she must have wanted to use the Holy Bible of Light for other purposes. Holy Queen, what do you mean? The Pope looked at the third prince with a complicated expression. He did not want to say this, but he had to. At this time, the Pope hated one of the bad habits of the Middle Empire people, which was that they were only willing to continue speaking when someone else had to continue. It seemed like they were all crosstalks. After someone spoke, the third prince obviously felt more comfortable. The Holy Queen said that if Jilin wants to fight the Demon King, the humans are willing to temporarily lend him the Holy Bible of Light to help him. As for the Holy Sword, it will be used by Bane. The third prince said with a smile. His tone seemed to hide endless cunning. Jilin did not understand why the third prince was so happy, but after a while, he suddenly understood. The third prince was cheering for Staya. He was happy for her. She did not die in vain. Her sacrifice was meaningful. At this point, the battle between Jilin and the Demon King was unavoidable. Staya bet everything in front of the world. The price of this gamble was too high. The condition of the table was her life, and the bet was all of Staya's glory when she was alive. She bet that Jilin would not let her lose. She won, because Jilin did not want her to lose. Where's the Holy Bible of Light? Jilin ignored the noise of the humans and looked at the third prince. The third young master smiled in relief, finally putting down the biggest stone in his heart. He thought that the Holy Queen was indeed extraordinary. Chapter 421. Ridiculous, treacherous, How can the Church of Light's treasure be given to the Red Calamity? The Holy Grimoire of Light has never been leaked for thousands of years. That person is weak. How can he control the Holy Sword? The Holy Sword was given by the God of Light himself. How can we lend it to others? Your Highness the Pope, we can't follow the Holy Lady's last words. The humans were clamoring at the side, like frogs in a lotus pond in summer, as if there was a F***king army in the small pond, or a summer cicada that could fight against 1,000. They proudly showed their existence to the heavens and earth. Meaningless shouting and yelling, other than disturbing the peace of others, had no other effect. High-level creatures responded to this by not listening. Jilin didn't want to pay attention to these humans. He was afraid that he would accidentally kill them all. After all, they were in front of Staya. The Pope also didn't want to pay attention to these people. He suddenly felt that the Church of Light's brainwashing work was really good, as expected of the world's #1 religion. Those who could stand behind him were all the backbone of the Church of Light. They were the top elites of the human race. To be able to reach this step, their minds were all top-notch. But why did they suddenly become a bunch of blockheads after staying in the Church of Light for so many years in Underlord's command? Couldn't they see such an obvious difference in power? In front of the Red Calamity, they didn't have any choice. Moreover, if they could really let the Red Calamity get rid of the Demon King with just one Holy Grimoire of Light, it could be said to be a small investment and a huge profit. Did these people know what kind of disaster the human race was about to face? That would be a true calamity. The entire human race was about to be destroyed. Why were these people still entangled in the Holy Grimoire of Light? Speaking of the Holy Sword, that thing was now stuck in the ground outside Wind Moon City. Many people tried to pull out, but they couldn't even touch the Holy Sword. But since Staya let Bane hold it temporarily, Bane should be able to pick it up. If he can't even pick it up, what if Staya doesn't let Bane take it away? Just stick it there? However, all of this was meaningless. When the Red Disaster heard Staya's last words, all of the humans' attempts to stop it would be meaningless. It would complete its mission. As expected, Jilin did not even look at these humans. He looked at the third prince and asked, "Where is the Cannon of Light? Your Holiness, can the Red Calamity use the Cannon of Light as well?" A bishop behind the Pope said in a low voice, "No, I should say, can anyone other than the Saintess use the Cannon of Light? Isn't the cannon a sacred object bestowed by the God of Light to the Church of Light, and only the Saintesses of each generation can use it?" The Pope sighed in his heart and ignored the person behind him. He really wanted a facepalm. He really couldn't understand these people with such strong beliefs, even though he used to be like them. After so many years, the Pope had seen through the nature of many things. His faith was no longer as firm as before. He began to learn to question God and everything. The reason why he was not in the Church of Light for many years was not just to follow in Aisha's footsteps. It was also because he often felt out of place among this group of people with such strong beliefs. Even if he was the first person in the Church of Light, he could not understand the thoughts of the people around him. Many things were obvious, but they just turned a blind eye. They were blinded by the leaves of faith. They could not see Mount Tai. Many things could be understood just by thinking about it, but they did not want to think or believe it. The Cannon of Light could only be used by the Church of Light. Only the Saintess could use it. The people of the Church of Light did not have any mark of light and were no different from others. Why could others not use something that could be used by them? The Cannon of Light could only be used by the Saintess was even more ridiculous. That thing was originally chosen by the Church of Light. The God of Light did not know who the Saintesses of each generation were. Why was she so special and powerful? Besides, when the position of the Saintess was empty, was it not someone else who was temporarily in charge? But the Pope did not say this to them because he knew that things would become very troublesome if he shook the faith of people with strong beliefs. It was the same for him in the past. The Pope had no choice. Since he could not reason with these people, he could only rely on his 200 years of legendary prestige to suppress them. Everything is the will of the God of Light. The Pope suddenly became extremely serious and serious. He became unfathomable and incomparably holy. It was as if he was really the spokesperson of God. The believers behind the Pope suddenly became quiet, and one by one, they suddenly understood. They bowed their heads and pondered. This was the experience of the Pope for more than 200 years. Everything is the will of the God of light. When your position was high enough, this sentence could overcome everything in the Church of Light. When you were the Pope, this sentence could also solve most problems outside the Church of Light. The Pope only moved his eyes and glanced at the believers behind him, looking at them as if they were shrouded in the holy light of light. He sneered at them for being idiots in his heart. At the same time, he was also worried about the future of the Church of Light. The future of the Church was this group of people. What should they do in the future? Seeing that the Pope had suppressed the anger of the Church of Light, the third prince got up and brought Jilin to get the Holy Book of Light. Jilin carried Stai's coffin and followed the third prince around half of the Wind Moon City. Finally, he saw the pure white book on the desk in a splendid bedroom. The cover and the pages of the book were extremely white, as if the book itself was also emitting white light. Good taste. Jilin first looked at the overall style of the bedroom and said so. I knew you would say that. The third prince said, This is the bedroom that the Snow Wind Empire specially decorated for me. In their eyes, this is more in line with my name as the Golden King of the Middle Empire. But I don't like this kind of thing. But you should like it. Jilin nodded. He knew that what the third prince said was true. In his impression, whether it was the rooms on the third floor of Spring Breeze Restaurant or the imperial study and bedroom in the palace, the third prince's room was full of wood, and there were very few things like gold and treasures. Jilin walked to the desk and ran his fingers across the white cover of the book. The texture of the hardwood came from his fingertips. You're just going to leave such an important thing like this? Jilin asked. He didn't understand why the third prince dared to be so casual with this thing. Even in his eyes, the Holy Book of Light was an amazing thing. He also felt that the many divine arts recorded in it were very powerful. For example, the mercy of the God of Light. You don't have to care so much about things of this level. The third prince said, If this thing is in my room, no one in the world would dare to have any ideas about it. Jilin shrugged and didn't comment on the logic of human thinking. Jilin picked up the Holy Book of Light, opened it, and then began to read page by page. He read it very seriously, but the problem was that he had seen the Holy Book of Light, and he had a photographic memory. The third prince looked at Jilin and sighed helplessly in his heart. This was something that he had tried many times but failed to do. But Jilin did it so easily, so naturally, as if it was eating and drinking. After a long time, Jilin put down the Holy Book of Light. He scratched his temples with his fingers. He looked very distressed. Brother Long, is the Holy Book of Light too profound? Is there anything that you don't understand? No. Then why are you doing this? I'm just thinking that there is no magic that can bring people back to life. Chapter 422. Magic that can bring people back from the dead. There really isn't any. Jilin spoke with a regretful tone, as if he had just realized this for the first time. Jilin looked at the holy grimoire of light that was emitting white light. His eyes that were originally filled with anticipation suddenly turned into disdain. What holy grimoire? What F***ing miracle of the God of Light? What dead people, flesh and bones? It's all a lie. Damn it, you even lied to a dragon. Are you still human? You can't even bring people back to life. That's enough. How dare you call this a divine artifact that represents the supreme king of gods? Jilin looked at the holy grimoire of light angrily. He couldn't throw it away, but he couldn't keep it either. The third prince's back was suddenly drenched in cold sweat. So Brother Long was actually trying to find a magic that could bring people back from the dead? This kind of thing would make a human's hair stand on end just by thinking about it. The third prince didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a deep darkness that wanted to swallow him up. He only felt that if Jilin was allowed to continue developing like this, it would inevitably lead to an even greater disaster. The reason was unclear, as if it was just intuition. So the third prince could only cover it up by laughing awkwardly. He wanted to change the topic, but he forgot that Jilin's mood was extremely disappointed and depressed. Therefore, His laughter seemed very out of place. Jilin looked at the third prince coldly. His eyes were like thousands of sharp steel needles, making the third prince feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Brother Long, the third prince suddenly understood why he had such a great sense of crisis. Coming back from the dead, this was the dream of all humans. It meant breaking the biggest shackles of humans. Humans had exhausted all means, but they still couldn't get what they wanted. It was like a Pandora's box. Humans had used a lot of effort, but they couldn't open it no matter what. The whole box didn't move, as if it was dead. But when Jilin tried to open the box, the third prince had a feeling that he could open it. That was clearly a human's dream, but when it was about to open, the third prince instinctively retreated. Maybe it was the mission of the human emperor, or maybe it was the wisdom that had been passed down from generation to generation in the Leaf family of the Middle Empire. But he had an intuition that was close to the heavens. He instinctively realized that things like resurrection from the dead should not be touched. Brother Long, the sacred Book of Light doesn't have such records. Why? Jilin asked. He did not know why the third prince would say that. He had never seen the Book of Light before. Because it goes against the teachings of the Church of Light. The third prince said with incomparable certainty, in the teachings of the Church of Light, devout believers of the Church of Light will ascend to heaven after death, see the God of Light, and enjoy eternal happiness. This is the purpose of their life of believing in God. So the Church of Light doesn't have the concept of resurrection from the dead. To them, resurrection means that one's life of cultivation is like water flowing east. Jilin nodded slowly, deep in thought. He really felt that the third prince's words were somewhat reasonable. Unfortunately, if the third prince was a scheming and astute human, he would know when to stop. Seeing Jilin's expression, he would have nodded and smiled. Everything would have been understood without saying anything. Presumably, this matter would have come to an end. Unfortunately, the third prince was, after all, a young man who was not even 30 years old. The third prince saw that even a megalosaurus like Jilin was moved by his words, and he could not help but feel a little proud. Then, he said a sentence as if he was showing off. Resurrection is regarded as a heresy taboo in the Church of Light, and no one is allowed to touch it. For thousands of years, no one dared to touch this taboo of the Church of Light, except the third prince suddenly stopped talking because he had realized that he had said something wrong. Unfortunately, it was too late. Except what? Jilin's eyes shone with a golden light. The third prince felt bitter in his mouth. At this time, he really hoped that Jilin's ears were not that good. Except, the third prince did not dare to look at Jilin. But Jilin already understood. In the thousands of years of human history, there was only one non-empire organization that dared to compete with the Church of Light. The Church of Light did not allow them to do something, and there was only one. Aisha's witch organization. Jilin was too familiar with the history of the Church of Light, because this was the most common topic when Staya and Aisha quarreled with each other. Jilin suddenly felt that he was a little stupid. Such an obvious question. The Church of Light regarded resurrection as heresy. So, the witches who were also heresy might not have this technology. Jilin put away the holy Book of Light. He turned and walked out. I'll leave Staya's coffin with you for now. I think no one in the world would dare to touch it. The third prince's face darkened. He thought that he was just saying that. Why did you take it to heart? This dragon, sometimes it was so smart, sometimes it was as stupid as a pig. Who would put a coffin in someone's bedroom? The third prince was annoyed, but he was even more annoyed at himself for not choosing his words carefully. Because according to the royal records of the Middle Empire, the witches did carry out similar research. Jilin walked back to the corridor. The Pope and Aisha were still talking there, and there was no one around except for Bane. The densely packed figures from before had all disappeared. Maybe the two of them wanted to talk, and then cleared the place. Aisha and the Pope saw Jilin at the same time, and then the two of them stopped talking at the same time. You got the Holy Book of Light? Aisha asked. Yes, Jilin said. Where's Staya's coffin? Bane asked. It's in the third prince's room, Jilin said. Why didn't you bring it with you? Bane asked. It's not convenient, Jilin said. What's not convenient? I'm going to take you to get the holy sword later. And then there's something else, so it's not convenient. Then where are you now? Bane asked. Jilin paused for a moment, then reached out to Aisha. Lend me the dark book. Haven't you seen it before? Aisha asked with a frown. Although she said that, Aisha still took out the dark book and handed it to Jilin as she spoke. Jilin took it and paused for a moment. He first glanced at Aisha, then at the Pope for 2 seconds. Finally, he sighed heavily. Aisha blinked. She knew that Jilin minded the fact that she saved the Pope from him before. But what do you mean by that sigh? Why does it look a bit like an old father who saw that his daughter picked an unsatisfactory son-in-law? It's a pity, but there's no other way. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she just stayed silent. Aisha was confused. Jilin didn't say anything and began to read the dark book seriously. The Holy Book of Light and the Dark Book of Light were really like two extremes. One emitted light, while the other swallowed all the light around it. One was a white page with golden words, while the other was a black page. The words were written in a darker color than black. It was a purer dark power, the condensation of darkness. Jilin looked at the Dark Book of Light expectantly, word by word. The light in Jilin's eyes gradually dimmed. For some reason, Jilin suddenly thought of a sentence that the humans had said. What's crueler than despair is to first give you hope, then make you despair. I could have endured the darkness if I had never seen the light. Chapter 423. There's nothing in the Tome of Darkness, either. Jilin whispered, I thought that God liked this kind of thing. What's not there? Aisha asked. There were many things that weren't in the Tome of Darkness. But Aisha didn't know what it was that Jilin was searching so hard for. A way to bring people back to life. Jilin said, the third prince said that you've done similar research. Aisha held her breath, and after 2 seconds of silence, she slowly said, yes. The witches have indeed done research on bringing the dead back to life. What was the result? Jilin asked. It failed. Aisha said bluntly. Obviously. Jilin said, but why? Because the gods won't let the witches succeed, so this path is completely blocked. Birth, old age, sickness, and death are the rules that the gods have set for humans, and the gods won't break the rules set by the gods, no matter what their standpoint is. Aisha sighed. Actually, the first person to study the field of the dead wasn't the witches, but a human called the Great Disaster. Jilin was stunned, and suddenly felt that humans weren't that imaginative and creative. I think you humans sometimes give names quite casually, and it's quite boring. Jilin's voice was slightly dissatisfied, as he felt that humans didn't care about him that much. The Pope sneered in his heart. If you knew how many dogs called Big Black and Big Yellow there are in this world, you'd probably be happier. That's definitely not the human's real name. Jilin said, obviously, that's just a name the humans gave him, and the Great Disaster's real name has long been lost. This was because everyone who knew of this person back then had kept his name a secret. They didn't even want to mention his name. Aisha said, because he was the one who researched the first necromancy magic. Didn't he research on bringing the dead back to life? Jilin asked. When people walk in this world after a long time, what they get in the end is always different from what they thought at the beginning, Aisha said. Jilin looked at Aisha speechlessly. He thought to himself, why do you have so many useless sentiments at this critical juncture? Aisha seemed to have realized that she was being inappropriate. She coughed lightly and continued. To put it simply, his research on resurrection failed. Necromancy is just a product of his failed experiment. It was said that in order to revive his wife, he used countless corpses to do all kinds of experiments. The Great Disaster was indeed a genius rarely seen in thousands of years. Under his research, countless corpses that should have been rotting began to move. Those corpses were the first zombies. They could jump, and they were very strong. Some of them could even talk, and some of them looked like living people. What a great invention. But he failed in the end. Yes, because his technology can only make the dead move, but it can't make them come back to life. Then why are you still continuing your research? Because the Great Disaster has a huge flaw. No, it's not wrong to say that it's an advantage. That was, he would immerse himself in his research without any distractions. In other words, he never cared about the zombies he created. Those monsters ran out of his residence and attacked any living person they saw. And even if humans cut off the heads of the zombies, it was useless. People called it the Great Disaster. That year, the zombie disaster spread to almost half of the Sinai Empire. It was also that year that the Church of Light established itself as the #1 religion in the world, because only the Church of Light's holy light could destroy the zombies. As a witch, I don't know how much the Church of Light paid to get rid of the Great Disaster. But from then on, the Church of Light explicitly prohibited anyone from researching necromancy, as well as the domain of the dead. When we witches researched resurrection, we didn't really want to resurrect anyone, but only to go against the Church of Light. With this kind of mentality, there naturally wouldn't be any results. Then your goal is quite pure. Jilin nodded. He already believed Aisha's words. Since the Holy Book of Light and Holy Book of Darkness didn't have any records, and with the Elven Queen's description, it seemed that the matter of resurrecting Staya could really come to an end. Holy Book of Darkness, lend it to me for a while, Jilin said. Aisha was taken aback. She suddenly had a premonition. After thinking for 2 seconds, Aisha said softly, I can, but although there are a few powerful spells in the Holy Book of Darkness, if you want to use them, you have to make an equivalent exchange with the God of Darkness. That's you. Humans can only submit to the rules of God because they were created by God. That gray human was the same. The reason he couldn't take back his wife's life from God's hands was because he was a human. But I'm different. Jilin closed the Holy Book of Darkness. Bane, let's go and get the Holy Sword. After Jilin finished speaking, he walked all the way north. His route was as straight as an arrow leaving the bow. But the road in Windmoon City wasn't as straight as Jilin's route. So, every time a wall appeared in front of Jilin, there would be a boom in the whole Windmoon City. Aisha suddenly felt a little irritable, because Jilin's state was really not right. She could understand Jilin's thoughts of not wanting to take a detour, but she didn't understand why Jilin wanted to smash these walls. There was clearly an easier way for Jilin to deal with him. For example, melting these walls. For example, releasing a fireball above his head, and then flapping his wings, he could fly into the sky. But Jilin didn't. He just raised his hand and smashed the walls one by one. For humans, this kind of behavior was easy to understand. It was simply venting. But for Jilin, it seemed to be the same. Aisha was shocked, thinking that Jilin actually had times when he behaved in line with human behavior. Aisha thought about it carefully and suddenly realized that it had been there for a long time. It was just that she only realized it now. The Holy Book of Darkness. What does the Red Calamity want with that thing? The Pope asked. Aisha's thoughts were suddenly interrupted, and she couldn't help but feel a little angry. Aisha looked at the Pope and said in a bad mood, What do you think? His own people have been killed. What else can he do? Get back at them and take revenge. Then he used the Holy Book of Darkness. When you go to find someone to take revenge, and you don't have full confidence, and no one can help you, you will naturally bring 2 more knives and prepare more means. The Pope suddenly gulped. Even the Red Calamity has no confidence. The Pope suddenly stopped mid-sentence, thinking that the previous Holy Lady was really a wise and brave person, but it was a pity that she died so early. Bane jogged behind Jilin, the scattered stones unable to hurt him now. Are we going to take revenge? Yes. Can you let me stab the Demon King? We'll see when the time comes. If you're not afraid of death, there's a chance. No. Chapter 424. Jilin kept moving forward, tearing down the walls he encountered. He was a little speechless at Bane's bold words and didn't want to discuss such things with him. He really couldn't understand where this logic of humans giving up their own lives so easily came from. Clearly, if one's life was gone, everything would be meaningless. Are we going to look for the Demon King just like that? Yes, that's the Demon King's territory. He should have countless demon gods under him, right? Yes. Then why don't we bring 2 more helpers? Just the 2 of us? In a battle between 2 megalosaurus, it's meaningless no matter how many bird helpers there are. Bane blinked. Of course it's meaningless to a megalosaurus like you. But shouldn't you consider me a bird? When two megalosaurus fight, the other has a sky full of birds behind him. You only have one behind you. When the time comes, they won't be able to hurt you, and then they'll be bored and find me. I think I'll end up in a miserable state. Aren't you not afraid of death? If I can use the holy sword on the Demon King, then I'll naturally die without regrets. Bane said, but if I'm killed by the Demon King's little soldiers before I can even touch him, then I'm still afraid. Besides, there's a human saying that ants can bite an elephant to death. That's impossible. That's just an analogy. You don't have to worry. Since he has thousands of troops behind him, even if it's just for show, I won't only bring you along. That would be too shabby and would be a disgrace to the Dragon Clan. Bane's face suddenly became as ugly as if he had eaten a fly. What do you mean by only bringing me along would be a disgrace to the Dragon Clan? Is there a need for that? But Bane didn't say what was on his mind out loud, because he knew that there was a problem that was countless times more important than his thoughts and complaints. Then where are your thousands of troops? As soon as Bane's voice fell, Jilin raised his hand again and smashed down another wall. There was a loud bang, which made Bane wonder if Jilin had heard what he said. But in the next moment, Bane stopped thinking because a sudden bright light blinded his eyes. Bane instinctively turned his head sideways and covered his eyes with his hands. Bane knew that they had reached the end of the road in Wind Moon City. The bright and beautiful sunlight shone in, causing a false warmth to emerge in people's hearts. The sun was such a powerful thing. When you looked at it, your heart would feel warm, even if that was not the case. The sun of the Snow Wind Empire had never been bright nor dazzling. However, Bane felt that this was the brightest sunlight he had ever seen. In the Snow Wind Empire, there was wind and snow all year round, and the sky was always gray. However, the ground was covered with mirror-like snow. This caused the sunlight in the Snow Wind Empire to become brighter. The cold wind, which was as sharp as a knife, blew in from the outside with a large amount of snow. Jilin's position was very high in the Wind Moon City, thousands of meters away from the ground. According to the exaggerated nature of human beings, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Jilin's feet was a bottomless abyss. Bane could not help but take 2 steps back. Jilin's half foot was outside the Snow Wind City, and the other half was suspended in the air. If a real human did this, it could only mean that he was tired of living. He was trying his best to seek death, and was only half a step away from success. As long as he exerted a little force or a gust of wind blew, he would fall down and scatter on the soft snow. My thousands of troops, Jilin looked back at Bane and raised his hand slightly, are not worse than the Demon King. Jilin and Bane stood very high, so they could see thousands of miles of snow at a glance. It was as if they were standing on top of a mountain and looking at the earth. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the incomparably white, as if it was the cleanest snow in the world. It was as if a brand new white cloth was suddenly stained with a touch of dust, and then it disappeared. Bane almost thought that he had seen wrongly, and he rubbed his eyes. However, when Bane put down his hand, he clearly realized that he had not seen wrongly. From one shadow, there were dozens of them. They were spinning and floating on the snow. They were like ghosts wandering aimlessly on the earth. When the shadow slowed down, it was easy to see it clearly. Long tails, long wings. Bane was very familiar with this shadow. Bane walked to Jilin's side and looked up. Just as he had expected, dozens of dragons were flying freely in the sky. Bane heaved a sigh of relief. 16 dragons were enough to ensure the safety of Calm Wind Pass. 20 dragons were enough to make the Divine Dragon Empire not dare to make a sound. 25 dragons were enough to make the surrounding empires not dare to look east. At this moment, there were 40-odd dragons flying in the sky. This was the full strength of the Divine Dragon Empire when it was at its peak. Our vast army has arrived. Let's go. Jilin grabbed Bane and leaped into the abyss. Xiaochen did not use too much strength, nor did he use any magic. It was just a simple step. Hence, Jilin and Bane fell together. A black shadow flew past. A megalosaurus perfectly caught Jilin and Bane. Flay stood on the megalosaurus' back, waiting respectfully for a long time. When Jilin landed on the megalosaurus, The other megalosaurus started to cry out. It was as if they were welcoming the arrival of their king. The megalosaurus voices were not pleasant to hear. They were like the most ear-piercing human alarm. Normally, when the Divine Dragon Empire's people heard this, they would instinctively cover their ears. However, they did not do so today. When the human warriors saw so many megalosaurus flying in the sky and crying out, they were stunned for only 2 seconds. Then, a loud cheer rang out in Wind Moon City. This was because the humans knew that these big fellows were their comrades this time. They were the strongest and most reliable companions. Since they were going to war together, they should cheer. As the megalosaurus cried out, the humans cheered. The entire world seemed to be boiling. Even the wind and snow were no longer cold. Jilin watched all this coldly. He did not know why the humans were so happy. Let's go. Jilin could not stand it anymore. Let's go and kill the Demon King. This way, when we send Staya home, we can straighten our backs a little. At least we won't be unable to raise our heads under the sacred monarch's tearful gaze. Bane was speechless. He thought to himself, even if you take revenge for Staya and kill the Demon King, you won't be able to raise your head when the time comes. Furthermore, weren't you the one who brought Staya out of her home back then? The megalosaurus became like migratory birds. They formed a V formation and flew toward the north. To the megalosaurus, this was meaningless. The resistance in the air was nothing to them. They flew like this because Jilin was standing on the back of the megalosaurus at the front. Jilin looked toward the north. His gaze was cold and calm. He was really like a vanguard general leading thousands of troops. When they passed by the place where Staya and the Demon King had fought, Jilin suddenly realized that there was an ice mountain here out of thin air. With Jilin's eyesight, he could see that the sacred sword was stuck in the deepest part of the ice mountain. Dragon's breath. The huge ice mountain disappeared without a trace in an instant. A huge crater appeared on the ground. In the middle of the crater, the sacred sword shone with a holy light. Staya's relics must not be left here. Chapter 425. To the north of the Snow Wind Empire was a territory that humans had never reached before. At least, there were no records of it. Because the environment here was too harsh for humans, the temperature was unimaginably low. The ground here was no longer covered with pure white snow. Instead, it had turned into solid dark blue ice. Bane had never seen blue ice before, but he heard that it was a color that would only appear when the temperature was extremely low. Under such conditions, the ice would be as hard as iron. Bane didn't know how cold it was outside. He only knew that if he left Jilin's special amulet now, he would probably instantly turn into an ice sculpture. This kind of situation where he could die at any time increased Bane's sense of crisis. He seemed to be a little uneasy. Jilin, isn't it a bit disadvantageous for us to go to such a northern place to fight the Demon King? A bit. Jilin didn't refute, because the Demon King was an opponent that he had to pay attention to. Then why don't we ask the Demon King to come out? You pick a place just like how humans pick a battlefield before a war. Because fighting in his home is more satisfying. Jilin glanced at Bane. Keep the sacred sword well. Bane lowered his head to look at the sacred sword in his arms and sighed in his heart. He felt that he had already kept it well. Actually, he knew very well that he didn't have the qualifications to use the sacred sword without anyone telling him. Because coincidentally, he knew the previous 2 owners of the sacred sword. The first owner, the hero Roar. The hero that the god of light personally chose from the lower realm. He was truly worthy of being called a ruthless person. In order to get rid of evil for the people, he was willing to do anything. That big brother walked all the way from the Saimai Empire to the Divine Dragon Empire, trekking on foot. The suffering he went through was almost beyond human imagination. But he had no regrets, of course. Of course, it might also have something to do with the fact that Jilin accidentally blew up his dilapidated house and crushed Roar's family to death. But in the end, this person was still righteous, wise, brave, and tenacious. Moreover, he was also very devout to the god of light. He was truly a standard story protagonist. What he did was what a main character should do. He suddenly encountered a great calamity and carried a blood feud with him. Driven by hatred, he went through all kinds of hardships and finally obtained invincible strength. He successfully defeated the evil dragon, saved the princess, and lived a life of success and fame. Or perhaps he lived a carefree life. Everything was so natural. It should have been like this. Only the second last step had a problem. The hero wanted to defeat an evil dragon, but that was against the rules. The hero had never been able to defeat it. Roar did what a hero should do, but Jilin didn't do what a villain should do. Facing a brave warrior who had gone through untold hardships, wielded a sacred sword, and was invincible under the heavens, who wanted to take revenge. Not only had Jilin not been defeated, but he had also absent-mindedly beaten Hero to the brink of death in just a few exchanges. He had also inflicted countless irreparable injuries on Hero, to the point where he could no longer use his sacred sword. At that time, if Aisha hadn't thought that it was profitable and saved him, this brave warrior would have been killed on the spot by the evil dragon. This was simply too unreasonable. Bane felt that this might be a mistake by the divine light god. If the hero was still unable to defeat the evil dragon after fully maturing, then it could only mean that there was a problem with the god who issued the quest. In other words, the god wanted to kill the hero. But no matter what, there was a good saying among humans: a hero wasn't judged by success or failure. Although Roar had lost, he was still a true hero. As for Staya, there was no need to talk about her. She was the true representative of the divine light god. As for Bane himself, he felt that compared to those two, he was like a firefly competing with the moon. Although they could all wield a sacred sword, those two used the sacred sword. As for him, he was more like a mount for the sacred sword, a carrier for the sacred sword. Jilin, do you still remember Roar? Bane suddenly asked. Who is that? Jilin didn't remember. That's the first man who came to you with a sacred sword. Is that so? Jilin thought for a moment. What was he doing here? What else? Bane was speechless. Of course it was to kill you. Why? Jilin chuckled, his smile carrying slight disdain. Since that person came to kill him, and he didn't remember, then there was an 80 to 90% chance that he had already been killed by him. Is it for the people of the world? For justice? That's possible, Bane said, but it's mainly because you destroyed his house. Jilin was startled. He suddenly felt that it was acceptable for this human to challenge him to a fight. He didn't seem to have purposely destroyed any house. He probably accidentally knocked it over. That meant that it was a broken house. Just for a broken house? You want to fight me to the death? Jilin was in disbelief. Yes, because his family was in the house when it was knocked over. Jilin was silent for a moment. Is that person dead? More or less. Oh, then do you remember Lysana? Who's that? The second princess you caught after Staya, the one with black hair. I have some impression of her. Only some impression? Bane was startled. You valued her a lot at that time. You even wanted to kill me for her. Jilin thought for a moment and remembered the woman related to the son of the dragon. Oh, it's her. Why didn't you mention her when we met this time? Because she's not important, Jilin said. You're just too powerful. Bane suddenly sighed. You always inadvertently hurt other lives around you, but you don't even remember who they are. Humans also inadvertently step on countless ants and ignore the ants' revenge. All living things in the world will always intentionally or unintentionally hurt other lives. You're just bickering. How is that the same? What's the difference? When humans step on ants, they really don't see it. You're not like that. Your eyes are so good that you can even see the whiskers of ants. No, Jilin shook his head. Most of the time, humans know that they hurt other creatures, but you never care. Humans flattened forests, built cities. How many animals lost their homes? How many creatures lost their lives when humans hunted? Bane fell silent. Every time Jilin brought up this topic, he was always speechless. Or rather, anyone would be speechless. You don't have to feel guilty. This is the law of nature. The strong eat the weak, the survival of the fittest. The essence of this world is to eat. One eats one eats one, and one is eaten. Of course, humans could try to kill me. They should, because the people who kill me can indeed gain countless benefits as long as they can do it. But on the other hand, those who kill others and eat others should also be prepared to be killed and eaten. Jilin suddenly lowered his head and looked down. Am I right? The king of the true human race. Bane was startled, then suddenly realized that they had already arrived at the territory of the demon god race. Bane followed Jilin's gaze. In front of them, a handsome youth with blue skin and simple clothes stood with his hands behind his back, looking up at them indifferently. Bane glanced at the youth, and a phrase suddenly appeared in his mind. Stunning. Because there had never been such a handsome person in the world. The Demon King looked at Jilin and smiled. Your Excellency is right. Chapter 426. Handsome, elegant, and dignified. It was as if all the compliments in the world could be used to describe the Demon King. His appearance was the same as the Elven Queen's. Perfect. No, it should be said that he met the human's definition of perfect. He merely stood there without moving, yet he was already the most eye-catching scenery in the world. Even the third young master, who was as gentle as the spring breeze, couldn't help but pale in comparison. Why did you come out? Jilin asked. Isn't this place still some distance away from your territory? Your Excellency must be joking. The Demon King smiled. Your Excellency has mustered such a large force and brought dozens of family members with you. How could I dare to neglect you? I have to clarify your intentions first. Otherwise, it's too risky for you to enter the true human's territory. My intentions? Jilin asked. I thought you already knew. Some things have to be said in person for it to count. You really sound like a human saying that. Because we are the true humans. The Demon King's perfect face finally darkened a bit. He had already said this countless times, but Jilin just couldn't remember it. True humans? Jilin looked to the north. With his eyesight, he could already see the true human's territory. In the snowy mountains were a series of simple igloos. A large number of creatures lived in the natural ice caves hidden in the mountains. TSK, TSK, TSK. Jilin clicked his tongue. Living in such a simple environment, don't you feel uncomfortable? You're not a fish. How can you know the joy of a fish? The Demon King suddenly said in a calm manner. Jilin was also surprised. Do you still read human books? The Demon King shrugged. What the dragon race can do, the god race can do as well. Jilin suddenly understood. The Demon King's knowledge should have come from something like a bloodline inheritance. I thought you would have negative thoughts about all humans. Jilin said, Your Excellency, please don't annoy me like this. The Demon King looked at Jilin with a rare hint of anger in his eyes. I've told you many times that we are the real humans. Jilin sighed tiredly. Is a person's name really that important? Man, horse, dog, pig, dragon, lion. What was the difference between these titles? Even if a human changed his name, he would still be himself. Even if the dragon race did not call themselves dragons, they could still look down on the world. It's just a name. Why are you so obsessed with it? The name of man naturally has its own meaning. Back then, the gods created 6 types of creatures and let them compete for the name of man. The winner can be called man. That should have been our glory, but it was stolen by a scoundrel. Jilin understood. This meant that the name human did have a special meaning. Just like the name Sword Saint, it represented the number 1 swordsman. If others wanted to obtain this title, they would have to defeat the original Sword Saint with their swords. Then how should I address these creatures? Jilin pointed at Bane. Despicable god's flatterer, wretched thief, traitor who deserves death, the Demon King said without hesitation. It seemed that this was how the true human race referred to the current humans. Bane blinked. He felt that the Demon King didn't seem to be referring to all humans. It seemed like he was only referring to himself, God's flatterer. If the people of the Church of Light weren't God's flatterers, then no one in the world would be worthy of this title. Thief. How did the Demon King know his occupation? Traitor. This was what he did when he was in the Divine Dragon Empire. Jilin slowly shook his head. Forgive me for refusing. Why? The Demon King's eyes turned cold. Because... Jilin paused. Because this name is too long and too tongue-twisting. The Demon King was silent for a moment. I thought that we were like-minded people. I really don't know when I gave you this misconception, Jilin said. Because you and I both loathe those traitors, the Demon King said. You and I both know their bad natures. They are short-sighted and selfish. The virtues they describe in their books are all fake. For the sake of their own desires, they can casually harm other creatures. They use all kinds of despicable methods. If such creatures disappear from the world, wouldn't this world be purified? You're right. Jilin nodded repeatedly. However, humans have a good saying, the flaws can't obscure the jade. No matter how many flaws they have, no matter how much darkness they have, they can't obscure their weak light. Humans also have their redeeming qualities. How many times have I said it? The Demon King suddenly gnashed his teeth. We are the true humans. True humans wouldn't keep emphasizing it like you do, Jilin said leisurely. Demon King, I think it's better for the current humans to be humans. Oh, is this the will of the dragon race? No, this is my will. That's insignificant. Bane swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He thought to himself, is this the end of the line? Bane was right. Indeed, Jilin instantly took out the dragon scale sword and pointed it at the Demon King. Demon King, I will make you respect my will. Sir, do you really want to do this? The Demon King asked. Sir, do you know that this is not a matter between the two of us? This is a matter between the two of us. Why? Because you killed a person who didn't deserve to die, Jilin said angrily. Ever since he saw the Demon King, Jilin had wanted to draw his sword and attack him. However, he had been holding back until now. Only now did he remove his disguise, revealing his sinister and terrifying appearance. Demon King, she's one of my people. Since you killed her, you'll pay with your life. Jilin shouted loudly. Also, before you die, you'd best swear an oath to me that the true human race is not allowed to take even half a step into the Demon Gate. If that's the case, I guarantee that apart from you, I won't touch anyone else from the true human race. Why can't the true human race pass? Because humans only know how to destroy the environment, but you can destroy the environment. This is also your will? This is the will of the woman you killed. The Demon King looked at Jilin and remained motionless for a full 3 seconds. It was as if he had seen something strange that he had never seen before. 3 seconds later, ha. The Demon King suddenly threw his head back and laughed until tears flowed down his face. He laughed until his entire body trembled. You're a member of the dragon race. Why are you acting as a messenger of justice to protect the world in front of me? The Demon King suddenly stopped laughing and pointed at Jilin. The true human race, will destroy the environment? This is not even worth mentioning in front of the destruction that you will cause in the future. You're the one who will end this world. You're the biggest disaster in this world. You're a dragon. You're a creature that will destroy this world. What are you saying to me? You should be on the same side as me. After all, our mission is the same, which is to destroy. My mission should be chosen by myself, Jilin said, and you're just a pitiful person who only knows how to follow the will of God. The Demon King laughed loudly again and raised both of his hands. Suddenly, a snowstorm began to fall. Challenging me in this place is the worst decision you've ever made. Golden light flashed in Jilin's eyes, and red scales appeared all over his body. The projection of the Megalosaurus appeared behind him, and 2 books suddenly appeared beside him. They hovered behind Jilin. Gradually, the light from the 2 books began to change shape. They turned into a pair of black and white wings and attached themselves to Jilin's back. A pair of black and white wings grew out from Jilin's human form. This was the power of light and darkness. Since I dared to come here, I naturally came prepared. Demon King, die. Chapter 427. As Jilin pointed with his sword, the 40 flying dragons behind him all spat out dragon flames. More than 40 lines of fire descended from the sky. From afar, it looked like a heavenly punishment. Flay's mind wavered as she watched. She thought to herself, what in the world can survive such an attack? 40 flying dragons, spitting out dragon flames at the same time. This was a situation that the Divine Dragon Empire had never reached, even when it was at its peak. Even the rising tide didn't require so many flying dragons. In Flay's eyes, even if the Demon King died, it would be a matter of course. Unfortunately, the Demon King was the Demon King. If he could be dealt with so easily, Stya wouldn't have had to die. An extremely clear ice wall appeared in front of the Demon King. It easily and unreasonably blocked the dragon flames of more than 40 flying dragons. That was almost the entire power of a human empire. That's enough. Jilin seemed to have expected this. He waved his hand casually. The 40 flying dragons stopped spitting out dragon flames at the same time. Their movements were uniform, as if they had rehearsed this countless times. Even if I brought a large army with me, it wouldn't be of much use, Jilin said. Demon King, where is your army? Your Excellency, don't worry. The Demon King smiled faintly. Since you and I are going to fight to the death, we naturally have to put on a show. Rumble, the snowy ground started shaking. Soon after, many true humans stood up from the ground. They were densely packed with blue-skinned humans. They seemed to have merged with the snowy ground. There were so many of them that Jilin almost thought that they were potatoes that grew out of the ground. Jilin's expression turned cold as he looked at the Demon King's handsome appearance. He thought to himself, "You look like a human, but you actually want to ambush me? You actually let so many true humans lie in ambush here. Are you trying to set up some kind of formation?" Jilin held the dragon scale sword with one hand and charged at the Demon King like a beam of light. With the enhancement of the light and darkness wings, his speed increased by a few notches. In just a split second, Jilin had completed his charging and slashing motion. Jilin's swordsmanship had already become very smooth. The earth and glaciers cracked under Jilin's sword. With a slash of the sword, the mountains and rivers were shattered. Clang! The sound of metal and stone colliding could be heard. The only one who could remain unscathed under Jilin's sword was the Demon King and the blue spear that he had pulled out of nowhere. Ha! Jilin sheathed his sword. A divine artifact? I didn't see you use it last time. That's only natural, the Demon King said. When sparring with each other, it's best to leave some trump cards. So dishonest. Jilin laughed. Does it have a name? Divine Spear, Eternal Frost. Divine Sword, Dragon Scale. After a short conversation, the Demon King and Jilin once again engaged in battle, exchanging blows back and forth. The spear radiance and the sword radiance kept flashing. Their attacks were like a storm, wreaking havoc in this world without stopping for even a moment. Daoist Shinrin, Flay, and the others all stopped what they were doing. They stared blankly at the life and death battle between Jilin and the Demon King. Their hearts were burning with anxiety, but they were powerless to do anything. It was only at this moment that they were convinced that Jilin and the Devil King were really here to put on a show of extravagance and extravagance. They had no intention of ambushing the other party or bringing helpers. Their existence had no other meaning other than to act as spectators. The bodies of the two people were densely covered with spears and swords. The flashing cold lights around them were the fiercest attacks. Even the slightest bit of their attacks would cause a huge crack to appear on the ground. Under such circumstances, any living being that stepped into the range of the two people would be crushed to pieces. They wouldn't even be able to get close to the two people. It was even more impossible for them to lend a helping hand. The Daoist Jinren looked at the flock of flying dragons in the sky. The flying dragons looked down at the Daoist Jinren on the ground. As they stared at each other, sparks flew everywhere. However, nothing happened. The reason why they stared at each other was because they were enemies. It was also because the battle between the two people couldn't be seen clearly. The reason why nothing happened was because both sides were extremely intelligent. They knew that the battle between them was meaningless here. Everything would become clear once the battle between the two people ended. If Jilin won, these Daoist Shinrin would naturally become meat on his chopping block. They wouldn't have any room to struggle. Whether they lived or died would depend on Jilin's mood. On the other hand, if the Demon King won, the flying dragons would also end up like this. Flay looked at the two distorted lumps of light. As a top-notch human legend rank expert, this was the first time she felt so powerless and insignificant. Flay sighed inwardly. She felt extremely disappointed. She turned her head and looked at Bane. She was immediately taken aback. Look at his calm attitude. He sat on the flying dragon's back and looked at the sky without looking at anyone. Why aren't you watching? Flay was puzzled. This is the most top-notch battle in the world. Take a good look at it. If you gain anything from it, it will be enough for you to enjoy it for the rest of your life. Flay was now the Red Dragon faction's chief. In a certain sense, she was Bane's superior. Chief's words are very true. Bane nodded repeatedly and agreed. But there is one thing. I have to be able to see it clearly. If I can't see it clearly, how can I gain anything? Right now, the two of them are just two flickering lights in my eyes. Flay was speechless. She couldn't refute this because she couldn't see it clearly either. However, even if she couldn't see it clearly, she couldn't bear to not look at it like Bane. This was why humans were so stubborn. They knew that something was impossible, but they would still try their best. It wasn't wrong to say that humans were stubborn, but it wasn't wrong to say that they were just lucky. Flay shook her head and ignored Bane. She turned her head and looked at the battlefield that she couldn't see clearly. Bane also shook his head and continued to look at the sky. He had tried to do the same thing with Flay before, but he failed. When Flay said that this was the highest level battle in the world, Bane didn't think much of it. This was because he had seen even more powerful battles. At that time, Jilin supported him with one hand and fought against the Elf Queen outside the Elven Island. Even though his eyes were covered with a white cloth at that time, he still felt that his eyes hurt when he glanced at the battlefield. He didn't dare to look at it again after a single glance. From that moment on, he knew that at Jilin's level, ordinary people would have to pay a price if they looked at him. Around Jilin and the Demon King, countless pieces of ice and snow melted and then froze into solid ice. Then, they melted and froze again. It was a cycle. It was as if this wouldn't stop as long as one of them didn't fall. Suddenly, the two sides collided violently and then retreated together. For the first time, their figures became clear in the eyes of the onlookers. The onlookers didn't know how they had fought. However, the changes in their bodies were clear enough at a glance. The Demon King's left shoulder had a sword wound that was several inches long. As for Jilin's body, there were two more wounds that were bleeding. One was on his left chest, and the other was on his left arm. Even though the wounds weren't deep after a round of spear and sword light, Jilin was at a disadvantage. You can't defeat me using human sword techniques, the Demon King said with a smile. Chapter 428. Jilin looked at the gunshot wound in front of him, and it was as if the world had quieted down. He no longer sat lazily on the back of the wyvern, and immediately sat up straight, looking at Jilin and the Demon King with a serious expression. This result was out of his expectations. He did not expect that Jilin would be at a disadvantage in a close combat battle. That was Jilin, who could understand Sword Saint's swordsmanship with just a glance. The powerful Jilin and Sword Saint's swordsmanship together could not defeat the Demon King. Jilin was silent for a moment, thinking that the true humans and humans were really natural enemies. Even their swordsmanship was the same, or else how could he have been stabbed twice by the Demon King? Humans can't win against you with their swordsmanship. It seems like that's true. The white wings on Jilin's back flapped lightly, and the two wounds on his body began to heal at a visible rate. In a breath or two, Jilin had already recovered to his original state. That was the power of the holy grimoire of light. Bane let out a long sigh of relief. Since Jilin could use the holy grimoire of light to this extent, he was in an undefeatable position from the start. There was nothing to worry about. As for the two wounds on his body, it was possible that Jilin did it on purpose. Of course, if you could heal any wounds in an instant, you would not be afraid of getting hurt and would not mind taking a few hits from the enemy to test the enemy's strength. Your Excellency really came prepared. The Demon King tilted his head. Such a terrifying healing ability, it really suits Your Excellency's identity as the Destroyer of Worlds. This is indeed an ability that the ultimate villain should have. You and I are the same. Your Excellency must be joking. All the evil in the world is nothing compared to the Dragon Clan, because you can destroy the world, turning all the good and all the evil in the world into nothingness. How can I be compared to Your Excellency? Although the Demon King said that, he still bent down to pick up a handful of snow from the ground and rubbed it on his wounds. The snow entered his wounds, turning into his flesh and blood. His healing ability was not inferior to Jilin's. No, it should be said that his recovery ability was above Jilin's. Jilin had relied on an over-god artifact like the sacred scripture of light to heal his wounds so quickly, but the Demon King only needed a handful of snow from the ground. No wonder the Demon King said that Jilin challenging him here was not a wise move. Because in this world of ice and snow, he was also in an invincible position. Jilin and the Demon King looked at each other and had the same thought. That was, he had to inflict huge and irreparable damage to the opponent in an instant. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to defeat the enemy. This was in Jilin's favor, because he had black wings. Black wings vibrated. All kinds of elements between heaven and earth began to appear at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then gathered in front of the Demon King. These elements were like specks of light, like colorful fireflies. Seeing this familiar scene, Bane's face turned pale, and his forehead was suddenly covered with cold sweat. Brother Long Run. Bane desperately rushed to the wyvern's head and shouted into its ears. He was all too familiar with this situation. Although he had only seen it once, that time was unforgettable for Bane. That was Aisha's most powerful magic, elemental fusion. It was also the greatest, most powerful, and most destructive spell in the history of mankind. When Aisha had used this magic to wake up Jilin, who had accidentally fallen asleep, they had deliberately found a small hill a few hundred meters away to hide. And now, they were floating in the sky. If they didn't hurry and run, they would be sucked in. Bane was burning with anxiety, and he forcefully slapped the wyvern's huge head. Unfortunately, the wyvern was unmoved. In front of two armies, the generals were killing each other. How could you let the spectating soldiers run away? That was called desertion. That was shameful. Dragons were high-level creatures, and there were some things that they would rather die than do. Retreat. Jilin looked back and lightly spat out a word. The flying dragon instantly turned around and left. It left even faster than it had come. With the wyvern's outstanding senses, they also knew how bad Jilin's move was. Even without Bane's words, they already wanted to turn and run. It was just that Jilin didn't say anything, and they didn't dare to move. Now that Jilin spoke, they weren't deserters anymore. They were obeying orders. Humans, retreat. The Demon King also raised his hand. The figures on the ice field instantly started to retreat at an extremely fast speed, like the blue sea water at low tide. It's useless. Jilin looked at the fleeing humans and said with certainty, "Why?" The Demon King asked. "Because flying is faster than running." Jilin pointed at the wyverns that were about to turn into dots. "My magic can be activated at any time. Once they escape from my attack range, none of the humans will be able to escape, so there's no need to run. Why waste the effort? But we can't just stand there and wait for death." The Demon King shrugged. "Also, aren't you looking down on me too much?" Jilin was startled. He looked at the Demon King seriously and asked, "What do you mean? Since I'm here, I naturally can't let you kill my people. You can't be thinking of taking this move of mine head on, right?" Jilin was a bit uncertain. "I don't want to either, but this is the king's responsibility. It's not easy for you either. As a king, you have to shoulder something. You really want to take it head on? Of course. I feel like you're looking down on me. I wouldn't dare. Fine. Although it's a bit unfair, since that's the case, you can pay with your life for Staya." The black wings on Jilin's back flapped. All kinds of elements began to gather, collide, and gradually fuse together. However, they couldn't coexist. Thus, the elements began to violently struggle. The result was a violent explosion. White light filled the sky. The entire world was illuminated. It was like the light of the beginning of the world. The light was too intense, as if the sun had fallen to the ground. The humans who couldn't help but look back were all blinded by the light, without exception. Then a huge gust of wind blew. The snow and ice on the ice field all melted. The ground under the ice finally saw the light of day for the first time in thousands of years. When a strong wind blew, A huge mushroom cloud the size of a mountain slowly rose and flipped. Dazzling lightning flashed in the black mushroom cloud. Everything in the cloud was annihilated. This wasn't a natural disaster, but it was a power that was more destructive than a natural disaster, because even a natural disaster would leave a chance for survival. However, this mushroom cloud that grew from the ground didn't. It was so resolute, leaving no chance for survival. Jilin looked at the black cloud. The golden light in his eyes was like two pillars of light. Jilin blinked. The pillars of light flashed twice. Not bad, you actually survived. Jilin looked at the ink-like black cloud and said softly. Chapter 429. The fierce hurricane swept across the land and the sky. The flying dragon was not slow. Moreover, it was under Jilin's care. Thus, Bane was already far enough from the hurricane. However, when the hurricane swept past him, Bane felt as though he had been hit by a battering ram. Bane felt his internal organs churning. If Flay had not kindly pressed down on his shoulder, he would have been sent flying. Bane felt the hurricane and knew that it was about time. Only then did he dare to turn his head back. It had to be said that those who had stayed with the Megalosaurus for a long time were very knowledgeable and smart. If he had turned his head back earlier, he would have been blinded. The enormous mushroom cloud surged in the sky. It was as though the clouds had sped up by countless times. That jaw-dropping height surpassed any other mountain in the world. How much stronger was it compared to when Aisha used it back then? It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was as different as the clouds and mud. The Demon King would probably not be able to withstand it. Jilin's move was able to make Bane feel that the Demon King might be defeated. It was enough to show how terrifying this move was. However, Jilin was not Bane. His eyes could see through the surging black clouds. He could clearly see the scene within. The Demon King was still floating in the sky. He was actually fine, other than his left arm, which was dripping with blood. Small wounds covered his entire arm. You only paid the price of one arm to block this move, Jilin said. It seems that I have underestimated you. A gust of cold wind blew past. It blew away the enormous mushroom cloud. The Demon King's figure appeared. Although one of his arms was covered in wounds and looked incomparably miserable, there was not much pain on his face. He was still as calm and gentle as before. Jilin frowned. Looking at your disgusting, pretentious appearance, I suddenly feel that you and humans are indeed the creations of God. You are exactly the same as them. What does God look like? Asking for a beating, the Demon King smiled indifferently. Jilin's words did not provoke him. What's more, it was normal for the dragon race to think that the deity deserved a beating. What is this move called? Jilin looked at the Demon King's bleeding arm and asked. At the moment when the elemental fusion turned into a dazzling radiance, he saw the Demon King raise his hand. In his palm, a blue light as deep as the ocean flickered, the realm of supremacy. The Demon King said, How is it? I'll block this move of yours. That's right. Jilin looked at the excited, true human race and sighed. The true humans were truly moved. It was easy to understand why their king had risked his life to take on the opponent's most powerful attack for their sake. If it was anyone else, they would also be extremely excited. Just like what the humans said, the king died for the state. But the problem is, even if you're excited, don't stop. Keep walking. Your king chose to take this attack head-on in order to buy time for you to retreat. In the end, you chose not to leave. Instead, you chose to watch the show and feel touched. At the end of the day, you're just lowly creatures who yearn for the name of the human race. Jilin sighed internally. He looked at the Demon King with a hint of pity. I blocked it, but it's useless. Your people are still within my attack range. They've wasted the precious time you've bought for them. The Demon King's gentle and handsome face suddenly stiffened. What do you mean? In other words, I can use that move again, and you'll have to take it. You can use that move again. Jilin shrugged. You're a creation of the God of Darkness. Logically speaking, there's no reason for you to be so ignorant of the Bible of Darkness. The original owner of the Bible of Darkness is a human by the name of Aisha. She's not one of the most powerful humans, but she can unleash extremely energy-consuming spatial teleportation magic at will. She can construct long-distance teleportation spell formations at will. Why do you think that's the case? The Demon King's expression became grave. He didn't say anything. Because the most powerful ability of the Bible of Darkness is the power of darkness, which is to swallow and absorb. The Bible of Darkness can absorb the natural energy of heaven and earth for its owner to use. In other words, the owner of the Bible of Darkness can use magic without consuming any energy. That's the ability of an over-god artifact. After Jilin finished speaking, the black wings on his back flapped slightly again. Keep running. The Demon King's voice resounded throughout heaven and earth. The humans were originally like solid ice sculptures, but at this moment, they suddenly seemed to come alive. They all turned around and ran. They had already realized their mistake. They just hoped that it wouldn't be too late. Don't turn around. Jilin's voice also traveled extremely far. Bane's heart trembled. He hurriedly closed his eyes and turned around. He didn't expect Qilin to be so unstylish as to repeat the same old trick. And this was under the premise that the Demon King couldn't dodge. This ruthlessness of hitting an opponent while they were down, seizing the opponent's weakness and not letting it go. Where was the demeanor of a supreme being? According to the plot of human martial arts novels, if the first move didn't work and didn't kill the enemy, they wouldn't use it a second time. How could they use the same move over and over again? They would lose their dignity for no reason. But Jilin didn't have the self-awareness of an over-god artifact. The dazzling light shone once again. Then there was the same strong wind, the same earthquake, the same mushroom cloud. The Demon King still raised his left hand to block. This time, the humans didn't turn around to look. But as they ran, they all had tears in their eyes and gritted their teeth. They felt incomparably humiliated. They felt humiliated that they had dragged their king down. They felt even more humiliated that their great king's opponent was actually such a despicable creature. In a battle of this level, even if it was a battle to the death, there should be some manners, right? How could there be no bottom line? This time, Bane really didn't want to turn around. It wasn't that he was afraid of being blinded. Rather, he felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. After experiencing another elemental transformation, the wound on the Demon King's arm became even larger, and two of his fingers had been severed. Clap, clap, clap. Jilin clapped his hands expressionlessly. After receiving 2 elemental fusion attacks, only 2 of his fingers were severed. The Demon King indeed had the advantage in this world of ice and snow. Unfortunately, the most important person was now in Jilin's hands, but this person was the Demon King's subordinate. Using the Demon King's subordinate to restrain the Demon King. This was also the reason why Jilin had arranged such a huge battle. He had calculated that the Demon King would definitely accompany him. Sure enough, the responsibilities of a king were heavy. The Demon King looked at Jilin and grinned. How is it? Impressive. Jilin was still clapping his hands. It's just that you're too stupid. The Demon King snorted and didn't say anything. Since you insist, don't blame me. The black wings on Jilin's back became incomparably huge. Elemental fusion started. Bang, 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 bang. Every loud bang was an elemental fusion attack that could destroy the heavens and the earth. By the time the Demon King ran out of Jilin's attack range, Jilin had already released 7 elemental fusions. Including the previous 2, he had released a total of 7 elemental fusions. Bane sat on the flying dragon and buried his head between his knees. His face was flushed red. What happened? Flay hesitated for a moment before asking. Bane was silent for a while. After a long time, he slowly said with pain, "How embarrassing." Chapter 430. How shameful. These were Bane's true thoughts. No, the words in his heart were even more unpleasant to hear. However, he knew that Flay was a believer of Crimson Unicorn. It was only because she was a legendary rank that he did not curse. Flay remained silent. She agreed with Bane's words from the bottom of her heart. She didn't understand why the Red Dragon God would do this. Even if he had grasped the opportunity, It would have been fine if he had gained some advantage when the Demon King couldn't dodge. Why did he have to take advantage of the Demon King's perilous state? 9 consecutive elemental fusion shots. How could he bear to do this? It was only at this moment that Flay truly felt the greatness of the Red Dragon God. If it were anyone else, they definitely wouldn't do such a thing. How is it? Jilin raised his head and asked. Jilin didn't seem to feel that his methods were despicable at all. He even seemed somewhat proud of himself. I really didn't expect this, the Demon King looked at Jilin and said. At this moment, the Demon King didn't look as calm as before. Half of his left hand was gone, and his entire forearm was gone. The left side of his body was covered with wounds, and he looked extremely miserable. He didn't have the demeanor of a Demon King. There are many things you didn't expect, Jilin said nonchalantly. Come, let me experience the Demon King's godly spear. Jilin's words were too shameless, and even the Demon King was speechless. The Demon King had lost half of his left arm, so how could he use his spear? Maybe there really were geniuses who could use swords, sabers, and other weapons with one hand. However, he had never heard of anyone who could use a spear with one hand. I really didn't expect that you would be corrupted by those lowly creatures to such a degree. The Demon King ignored Jilin's mockery and said, How did the dragon race degenerate to such a degree? If you said that you learned how to use your wisdom, it would be easier for me to accept, Jilin said with a smile. I originally thought that existences like you and me wouldn't use such despicable methods, even if it was a life and death battle. Jilin sneered in his heart. He thought, the Elf Queen even sneak attacked me with an arrow. So what are you doing? What are you laughing at? Jilin shrugged. I just want you to know why it's these people and not you who are called humans. Why? Because battles never start after the horn of charge is blown. This is a truth that all human generals know, but you don't. Jilin purposely spoke in an unfathomable manner because he intended to be unreasonable. Both sides have gathered their men and then set up their respective formations to fight fair and square. This kind of thing has long ceased to exist since ancient times. The current battle was a contest between the two sides that had been arranged in advance. This is the reason why you lost your human name. The humans won the battle before it even started, and you guys are still foolishly waiting for them to fight to the death with you. If Aisha was here, she would find that Jilin was particularly talkative today, as if he was explaining something. Your Excellency, the Demon King's blue face was fuming with anger. Why are you degrading yourself? How could he compare himself to those lowly beings? You don't deserve to fight with me. Jilin felt a headache coming on when he heard the Demon King's idiotic declaration. I'm about to win, and you're telling me I don't want to fight with you? What kind of idiot was he to say such words? This kind of person was the king of the human race. It looked like the survival of the fittest was fair, and it wasn't unreasonable for the human race to be eliminated. Jilin massaged his temples. Demon King, everything in this world is equal. There's no such thing as nobility and lowliness. Only humans who have too much time on their hands would play this game. There's no such concept in the real world. So why do you think you're so extraordinary? I don't think I'm extraordinary. I just wanted to fight you with my full strength, but I didn't think just a small trick. It's also my full strength. As far as I know, the Dragon Tribe wouldn't say something like that, nor would they do something like that. You've slept for too long and woke up too late. Times have changed. Do you think you'll regret it in the future after tarnishing our duel? TSK. Jilin clicked his tongue before heaving a heavy sigh. Why don't you understand what I'm saying? I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to kill you. I have to kill you, but I don't have absolute confidence in my victory, so I can only resort to unscrupulous means. That's not my intention either. I also want to have a fair battle with you and achieve a glorious victory. It's just that. I'm sorry. You can only blame yourself for killing the wrong person. Jilin pointed his sword at the Demon King. As a member of the Dragon Tribe, you've lived in this world for many years. How could you not know of the countless sins of disobedience? Why do you associate yourself with humans? I think you've misunderstood. I'm not here to kill you to protect humans. Whether humans live or die has nothing to do with me. I also know that they've committed grave sins. For their own selfish desires, they have no bottom line and cruelly persecuted other life forms. In order to make monkeys learn how to somersault and elephants learn how to dance, humans have resorted to inhumane methods. They put the fishes in narrow fish tanks so that they can't be free for the rest of their lives. They can only live in an incomparably suffocating space. Childbirth and excretion have to be carried out in front of everyone. The big fishes panic while the humans cheer in response. If that's the case, wouldn't it be better if you and I worked together to exterminate humans? There's no need for that. I'm here to avenge Staya. As for the equality of all creatures, monkeys, elephants, birds, fish, and insects, I'll slowly teach them to humans after you're dead. Do you think you've already won? The Demon King said in a low voice. What else can I do? Jilin laughed. I didn't have the confidence to beat you before. Now that I'm fighting someone with a missing arm, if you still can't beat me, it'll be too embarrassing. Let me advise you, don't be careless. A snowstorm suddenly appeared. Endless snow and ice gathered on the Demon King's broken arm. Gradually, a crystal-clear ice arm appeared on the Demon King's arm. The Demon King picked up the spear and wielded it with both hands, making a beautiful spear move. The Demon King's arm was clearly healed, but Jilin shook his head in disdain. He didn't even look at it. Although the Demon King's elemental condensed arm looked the same as before, it was more than enough to deal with humans. But against Jilin, it was definitely not enough. This was enough to become the Demon King's fatal wound. Jilin's body ignited with flames and then expanded. The ferocious red megalosaurus appeared out of nowhere. The dragon scale sword expanded with the wind and became a few hundred meters long. Jilin slashed down with all his might. The Demon King raised the spear with both hands to block. Crack! The Demon King's spear was intact, but the ice arm shattered. Demon King, although I won unfairly, I gave up my glory for you. You died a worthy death. Jilin sent the Demon King flying with one slash and said calmly. Chapter 431. Sir, if you think you're sure to win just because I lost an arm, then you're very wrong. The Demon King's body began to emit a chill that could freeze and dry the air. Every grain of snow on the northern ice field began to vibrate slightly. The vibrations were almost undetectable, but Jilin could feel it. The entire ice field began to resonate with the Demon King. All the ice and snow energy in the sky was being used by the Demon King. Blue light and wind swirled around the Demon King's palm like a storm of ice. The Demon King had already made up his mind to exchange magic with Jilin. Although he knew that dragons had incredible magic resistance, and that most magic was ineffective against dragons, this was definitely not the best way to fight. But he had no choice. Because he had lost an arm, he was no match for Jilin in close combat. He could only do so. A huge and sharp wind blade shot out from the Demon King's hand, and the ice blade was extremely long and thin. It was as if a crack had appeared in the air. Facing the Demon King's magic, Jilin didn't dare to take it head-on. The dragon's huge body was unusually agile. With a flap of his wings, Jilin retreated a few dozen meters and dodged to the side. He coldly looked at the Demon King. This action was no different from a deathbed struggle in his eyes. What do you think of the ice blade just now? The Demon King asked. It's useless, Jilin whispered. Jilin was a bit sad, although he used dishonorable means first, but in the end, the Demon King was still in existence on the same level as him. He didn't want to see the Demon King die too badly. A deathbed struggle wasn't suitable for proud creatures like them. That was something only wild dogs would do. Seeing that defeat was already set in stone, why not face death calmly? Jilin thought that the Demon King had already lost, but the Demon King didn't think so. He was one of the most powerful creatures. Even without an arm, he still had endless means to use. Moreover, how could he be defeated by such dishonorable means? This was like two lions fighting to the death, and you found a hedgehog and stabbed one of them. Regardless of who won or lost, the main thing was that it was disgusting. The Demon King began to breathe heavily, and the wind and snow began to swirl around him. He wanted to release an even more powerful spell. Jilin's eyes dimmed slightly before they suddenly brightened. The Forbidden Land. The Demon King trembled, and the spell he was about to cast was suddenly interrupted. The Demon King was taken aback. He wanted to mobilize the elements of heaven and earth, but no matter how he tried, it was to no avail. This meant that he could no longer use magic. The Demon King looked up at Jilin. Jilin's golden eyes flashed with an intense light. They were like two bright lamps. The Demon King felt the changes in his body and smiled helplessly. The Golden Dragon's Supreme Eye Technique. You know that too? It's a supreme divine ability that even the gods fear. It's an ultimate technique that can make all divine abilities effective. How could I not know? I just didn't expect that you would be able to use the Golden Dragon's natal skill despite being dressed in red. Jilin pointed at his eyes. A real fire dragon should have red pupils as well. You shouldn't have overlooked this. You once said that you were the son of the Fire Dragon King, and I didn't doubt it. Moreover, dragons are rare, so it's not strange for a red dragon like you to have golden eyes. But it's very strange that you can use the Golden Dragon's supreme technique. When you introduce yourself, you'll habitually mention your father instead of your mother. This is the same for humans and dragons. It's a pity that your body isn't as strong as the Golden Dragon. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been injured in the previous battle. I'm red after all, so I might not lose. Jilin was speechless. He didn't know where the Demon King's unreasonable confidence came from. He couldn't use magic now, and he was missing a hand in close combat. No matter how he looked at it, Jilin had the absolute advantage. I don't believe that you can keep using this eye technique. The Demon King revealed the source of his confidence. Jilin came to a sudden realization. The Black Dragon King named this eye technique the Forbidden Land. If you were at your peak, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to use this Forbidden Land for long. But now you could try it. All right, I'll try it. The Demon King stabbed the spear into the ground beside him, bent down to pick up a handful of snow, stuffed it into his mouth, chewed a few times, and swallowed it with a gulp. The Demon King stood up straight and straightened his back. He suddenly became energetic, and his eyes shone brightly. It was as if he had recovered all his energy in an instant. It was even better than before. It was as if he wasn't eating a handful of snow, but some miraculous elixir made by the gods. TSK, why do you have to do this? Jilin sighed. Things like this that could forcefully rejuvenate people would inevitably have side effects. It was only a temporary effect, but side effects were long-lasting and far-reaching. Hiss, the Demon King began to suck in a breath of cold air, and his face became somewhat ferocious. Blue rays of light lit up from his body, and thin rays of light flowed around his body. Those were his blood vessels and veins. The Demon King appeared to be in great pain, but his aura continued to rise. Jilin was surprised. He thought to himself that the true humans were indeed extraordinary. Just eating a mouthful of snow could have such a powerful effect. It was as if some powerful drug had been injected into the Demon King's blood vessels. This is the true human's ultimate technique. The Demon King smiled. Although the Demon King's appearance was unparalleled, his smile was not pleasant to look at. Because of his pained expression, his smile looked like he was gritting his teeth. Seems like the price is not small. Jilin said. Yes. The Demon King said, we true humans are of the same origin as ice and snow. Logically speaking, we cannot eat snow. Once we eat snow, our bodies will begin to reject it. Our blood will flow faster. It will bring us unparalleled pain. This is the rule that the God of Darkness set for us. But at the same time, while enduring this pain, our speed and strength will also greatly increase. The Demon King pointed his spear at Jilin, wanting to fight. Then when the time comes, how do we stop? Jilin asked, looking very concerned about the Demon King. After killing the enemy, we just have to force the snow out of our bodies. The Demon King said, what if we cannot kill the enemy? That is also very good. The Demon King's smile calmed down, as if he had already adapted to that great pain. Our true human's body temperature is very low, but if our blood continues to flow at such a high speed, it will inevitably gradually heat up. Once the blood temperature loses control, under the stimulation of cold and heat, The true humans' bodies will self-destruct, perishing together with the enemy. Self-destruct, Jilin said, truly a beautiful death, one that suits the Demon King's identity. Perhaps before I self-destruct, I can get rid of your distinguished self. The Demon King said. Immediately afterwards, the Demon King took a step forward, using all his strength to throw the Eternal Frost Spear at Jilin. The spear radiance was like a rainbow, like light and lightning. Chapter 432. The spear that the Demon King threw with all his might was really fast. It was so fast that Jilin almost couldn't dodge it in time. From the ground to the clouds, it didn't even take the blink of an eye. From where Bane was standing, he could clearly see the frost spear shooting into the sky. The trajectory of the Eternal Frost God Spear seemed to be a line that connected the heavens and the earth. Jilin was very surprised, because the might of the Demon King's spear was even stronger than when his hands were still intact. This didn't make any sense, unless that handful of snow the Demon King ate was really useful. But Jilin was even more surprised. The Demon King threw the spear in front of him, and so far away. How was he going to pick it up later? Just as Jilin was feeling puzzled, the Demon King used his actions to tell Jilin the answer. He didn't want to pick up the spear he threw. The Demon King roared at the sky, and the wind and snow in the sky surged into the Demon King's body. The Demon King's body began to change shape. Even someone as strong as the Demon King let out a miserable scream. Only then did Jilin realize that the mouthful of snow he had eaten earlier was merely a demonstration. This was the real, desperate move. The Demon King's body began to expand until it was the same size as Jilin. Then, 2 more arms stretched out from the Demon King's back. An indescribably strange aura was emitted from the Demon King's body. Jilin was somewhat dumbfounded. He thought to himself that this was too unreasonable. Didn't this mean that his previous plan to cripple one of the Demon King's arms was completely useless? In an instant, his advantage was completely gone. The tables had even turned, because the Demon King now had 1 more arm than him. Can the true human transform? No, this is a special ability of the true human king. The true human image. Which true human has 4 arms? According to the god's original plan, there should be. You think you have an advantage because you have 1 more arm? Didn't you think so before? But I have the dragon scale sword now. You must be joking. The Demon King raised his hand towards the sky. Which divine artifact can't be recalled? Sure enough, as the Demon King raised his hand, the Eternal Frost Godly Spear turned into a streak of blue light and fell from the sky into the Demon King's hand. Jilin felt a headache coming on. It turned out that he had wasted all his time. But there was one good thing. The Demon King was now fighting with his life on the line. It wasn't easy for him to maintain his current state. Sooner or later, he wouldn't be able to hold on. As long as he could hold on until the Demon King self-destructed, Jilin would naturally obtain complete victory. Jilin made up his mind and began to fight while retreating. The Demon King no longer used any magic, because any magic was meaningless in front of the Golden Dragon's forbidden land. This was the consensus of all the gods. Therefore, the Demon King could only blindly attack with his spear. On the other hand, Jilin nimbly used the dragon scale sword, which was as wide as a door, to block the attack. He used a huge sword like a shield. Coupled with the occasional dragon's breath, magic, forbidden land, and end of fire, Jilin's conservative fighting style was on par with the Demon King's desperate fighting style. The Megalosaurus and the Demon King fought in the sky. At least, that was how it looked in the eyes of mortals. The Demon King had 3 arms, and the spear in his hand was like an ice dragon emitting wind and snow. Even white clouds would be instantly frozen if they touched the Demon King's spear. The red Megalosaurus was completely unafraid. The huge sword in his hand was as heavy as a mountain, and the bright red blade contained a scorching heat. The huge sword slashed through the sky, and even the sky became blood red. It was as if a blood-red sunset was about to set, and it really was as if fire was burning. Every move of the two was a huge disaster to this world. The huge sword slashed through the sky, and the wind howled and the earth burned. The spears swept through the air, and snow swirled and froze the space. This was an ultimate confrontation between ice and fire. It was a collision between two disasters. Jilin retreated as he fought, and the Demon King chased after him as he fought. The two of them headed east, gradually getting further and further away. Fortunately, the two of them were focused on fighting, and their speed was not fast. Bane and Flay rode on their wyverns and were able to follow the two of them from distance. The Demon King and Jilin were like the sun in the sky, slowly drifting through the sky. At this time, the Demon King and Jilin no longer cared about hiding from the eyes and ears of others. Moreover, the two of them did not have such a concept in their hearts. After all, one of them viewed humans as ants, while the other viewed humans as despicable rebels. Therefore, countless humans saw this battle. Most of the humans who saw this had their mouths wide open, and their expressions were lifeless. Their eyes were filled with despair. No one knew where these two terrifying behemoths had come from. Why did they suddenly start fighting? However, the humans instinctively realized that this news was like the end of the world for them. Jilin and the Demon King were like two gods fighting in the sky. Their strength made countless humans feel how insignificant they were. The sense of security created by dominating the world for many years, and the arrogance that seemed to possess the entire world, instantly disappeared like catkins in the wind, fluttering in the wind. Moreover, the so-called sense of security and arrogance that humans thought were fake things that humans used to comfort themselves. Humans always placed their gazes on the ground, and very few people were willing to spend time looking up at the sky and the vast starry sky. This was because the sky was too vast and the stars were too beautiful. They could easily make humans realize how insignificant they were. They, and even the world they lived in, were only a tiny speck of dust in the vast universe. No, perhaps the world could be considered dust, but humans could not even be considered dust. Dust in the universe could float for tens of thousands of years. However, human lives, perhaps it would be more appropriate to say that humans were bacteria in the universe. Humans were unwilling to accept this reality, and they could not change it either. Therefore, they could only instinctively avoid it. Therefore, they restricted their vision and only looked at the ground, and not the sky or anything beyond the sky. However, they could not do that now. Humans were unwilling to look at the sky, but the sky itself fell and landed in front of their eyes. The strength of Jilin and the Demon King, to humans, was like the sky, something that made them feel insignificant. The humans felt a deep sense of danger from the depths of their hearts, although they did not know why the Demon King and the Megalosaurus were fighting. However, humans knew that no matter which side won, humans would face a huge disaster. Humans were already very familiar with the red Megalosaurus. Humans had once gathered a four-nation coalition to suppress it, but in the end, they returned in defeat. Such a big matter could not be hidden from others. Although all the countries tacitly issued a gag order to conceal the existence of Jilin from the common people, anyone who had a little bit of knowledge would know clearly. Because the result was too big. It was so big that it could not be ignored. The vitality of the Snow Wind Empire was greatly damaged. The Southern Exian Empire was directly destroyed. The War King and the Fist Emperor died. They were all legendary figures. This was only a Megalosaurus, and now there was a blue figure that could compete with it, and even faintly had the upper hand. Humans looked at the battle between the two that could destroy the world. They did not hope for anyone to win. They hoped that they would both die. Chapter 433. Jilin and the Demon King fought as they retreated. The humans who were fortunate enough to witness this battle with their own eyes could not help but silently pray in their hearts, hoping that these two would perish together. Although this was everyone's wish, the prayers of humans were rarely fulfilled. Therefore, the Demon King and Jilin would not perish together. They would fight to determine the victor, and one of them would be left alive. Judging from the current situation, Jilin would survive. In order to win this battle, Jilin gave up his dignity and pride as a Megalosaurus. He used underhanded means to restrain the Demon King. And in order to fight Jilin while being at a disadvantage, the Demon King took the initiative to walk to the edge of the abyss, placing himself in a position where he had to fight with his back against the wall. According to the humans, the Demon King's fighting style was akin to putting oneself in a desperate situation and fighting to survive. Your fighting style is dishonorable. So what's the point of winning? The Demon King launched a storm-like attack while questioning Jilin. The current Jilin had countless answers to this question, but in the end, Jilin did not say anything. He only moved the giant sword left and right, blocking all of the Demon King's attacks. You're fighting for humans, but humans are not grateful. Is such a despicable, cruel, and ungrateful creature worthy of you? After 4 days of fighting, the Demon King and Jilin had almost crossed the entire continent. They went from the ice field to the Central Plains, from the Central Plains to the sea. They had been fighting all along. The various expressions of fear, astonishment, and despair on the faces of the people below did not escape the Demon King's eyes. He knew what that meant. Humans? No, creatures that stole the name of humans, even after millions of years, had not been frozen, and their narrow-mindedness and despicableness had not changed in the slightest. Even though times had changed, they were stubbornly unwilling to change in the slightest. This judgment made the Demon King even angrier at Jilin's current actions. Although, in a sense, the Demon King's words were good, in Jilin's ears, for some reason, they sounded very unpleasant. It was even worse than when the Demon King scolded him. When the Infernal King scolded him, Jilin knew that he was in the wrong and could ignore him. However, if the Infernal King said that he was fighting for humanity, Jilin could no longer swallow his anger. I've already said it a few times. This is not a duel. It's purely revenge. Since Jilin refused to admit it, there was nothing the Demon King could do. He could only continue to attack even more fiercely. The Eternal Frost Spear was unbridled and unrestrained. Wherever it went, it was as if 10,000 men couldn't stop it, and the Tao of rivers and rivers changed. Gradually, the Demon King fought more and more desperately, even giving up on defending against Jilin's counterattacks. Jilin found an opportunity amidst the Demon King's careless attacks. He aimed at the Demon King's waist and fiercely slashed. Given Jilin's strength and the size of the Dragon Scale Sword, the Dragon Scale Sword's power could not be underestimated. If this sword strike landed, it would definitely be able to cut the Demon King in half. Jilin originally thought that the Demon King would retreat or put away his spear to defend himself, but he never expected this. The Demon King actually didn't care. He didn't even look at Jilin's giant sword. He only used all his strength to stab with the spear, aiming at Jilin's chest. This was obviously a suicidal attack. Although the Demon King had started fighting like this after eating that mouthful of snow, it wasn't as resolute as this spear strike. Previously, the Demon King had only placed himself in a desperate situation. However, from this spear strike onwards, he was truly going all out. If you cut me with your sword, I don't care. I just want to stab you with my spear. Jilin could guess why the Demon King suddenly acted this way. This battle had been going on for 4 days. The Demon King had been enduring the pain of accelerated blood flow. At this point, even the Demon King probably couldn't hold on anymore. Since he saw that the Demon King was like a lamp that had run out of oil, Jilin saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Logically speaking, as long as Jilin persisted in defending, he could exhaust a powerful Demon King to death. This was the best way for things to develop. However, Jilin was a dragon after all. Moreover, he was a fire dragon with the most fiery temper among all dragons. His stomach was full of anger. Even if the truth was as the Demon King said, Jilin had been contaminated by humans and had done many things that dragons couldn't do. However, he was still a dragon in essence. After being suppressed by the Demon King for 4 days, the anger in Jilin's chest could no longer be suppressed and rushed straight to the top of his head. At this time, seeing the Demon King's crazy fighting style, as if he was sure that Jilin wouldn't be willing to fight to the death with him, Jilin couldn't hold back anymore. Jilin gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He didn't believe that the Demon King could kill him with one spear strike. Moreover, his body was covered in dragon scales that were comparable to divine weapons, while the Demon King wasn't. If he fought like this, he would be the one to gain. However, when the dragon scale sword landed on the Demon King's waist, Jilin instantly felt that something was wrong. The dragon scale sword was moving too slowly. When the giant sword cut into the Demon King's body, the blade couldn't go any further. Even with Jilin's great strength, he couldn't make the Demon King's wound any deeper. It was as if there was a huge whirlwind in the Demon King's body that was pushing Jilin's sword outwards. Jilin was stunned. Only then did he realize how terrible the Demon King's body was at this time. With such violent energy wreaking havoc in his body, the Demon King might be unable to suppress this energy at any time and self-destruct. Kacha! The tip of the Eternal Frost spear sank into Jilin's chest. Along with the tip of the spear entering Jilin's body, there was also pure ice energy. This ice energy seemed to be the source of the ice plains in the north. It was incomparably cold and could even freeze volcanoes in an instant. However, when it entered Jilin's body, it only made Jilin shiver. Jilin had never shivered in his life. Jilin was angered by the Demon King's desperate fighting style. He controlled every scale on his body and tightly locked them together. The scales were tightly closed, not leaving a single gap. The Demon King's spear was firmly clamped by Jilin's scales. The Demon King used all his strength, but couldn't make the spear move forward or retreat in the slightest. The Demon King simply gave up on the spear. He grabbed Jilin's wings with one hand and smashed his other two hands towards Jilin's eyes. No creature should fight with a megalosaurus unarmed. You either had a good sword and armor, or you had a powerful magic protection, because your fist was just a piece of hard meat in the eyes of the megalosaurus. Jilin opened his big mouth. His sharp dragon teeth flashed coldly and met the Demon King's fist. He wanted to bite off half of the Demon King's arm. The claws and teeth of the dragon race were their most powerful and fundamental weapons. Oh, Jilin failed to bite off half of the Demon King's arm. At this time, the Demon King's body was filled with endless wind and snow energy. His body was indeed incomparably hard. He only succeeded in biting off the Demon King's wrist. But for this, Jilin also paid a huge price. The Demon King's remaining hand landed on Jilin's right eye. A sharp pain assaulted his brain. His eye felt like it was being pierced by countless steel needles. Jilin couldn't even open his eyes at this time. Jilin let go of the Demon King and fell down in pain. Boom! With a loud sound, Jilin fell to the ground. This was an island in the middle of the sea. It stood alone in the middle of the vast and misty sea. As luck would have it, Jilin smashed it head-on. The Demon King also fell. I lost another hand, but to be able to destroy your excellency's forbidden land, it was worth it. Jilin used one hand to cover his injured eye to relieve the pain. He used his remaining golden eye to look at the Demon King, who was covered in cuts and bruises and had lost both his hands. For some reason, Jilin suddenly sneered. His situation wasn't any better than hers either. What are you laughing at? The Demon King also didn't understand. Looks like you're really going to die soon. Jilin sneered. You actually didn't notice where this place is after such a long time. The Demon King was stunned. He turned his head and looked around. His eyes slowly widened. This is Chapter 434. The Demon King glanced at the surrounding environment. In just 2 breaths of time, the Demon King realized something. This was a lone island on the sea, standing alone in the middle of the sea, isolated from the rest of the world. From the outside, this was an extremely ordinary island that would not attract anyone's attention. However, there was one thing that made this island stand out from the rest, and that was the unusually dense vegetation on this island. The surrounding aura of life was so dense that it was almost tangible. This is the Origin Island. The Demon King made 2 circles on the spot, looking at everything on the island twice, and then asked in a daze, The Origin Island? Jilin was also stunned. This was the first time he had heard of this name. The island that contains the origin and truth of this world, the Demon King said. No matter what this island is called, you just need to remember that this is your burial ground. Jilin turned into his human form. His right hand was still covering his eyes, and the white wings of light formed by the sacred book of light behind him shone brightly. He focused on healing Jilin's injured eyes. Not fighting anymore? The Demon King asked coldly. Yes. Jilin grinned. Because your opponent has changed. As Jilin spoke, he raised his thumb and pointed behind him. The Demon King looked behind Jilin and became dumbfounded. The Demon King looked at the graceful figure behind Jilin and was speechless for a long time. In the end, he could only sigh slowly and look at Jilin. You've really put in a lot of effort to kill me. You're unscrupulous and unscrupulous. Well said. Jilin shrugged and spread out his hands. In human terms, this is called inviting the enemy into a trap. Now that things had developed to this point, Jilin also had nothing much to say. Behind Jilin, the elven queen, who was wearing a white gauze dress and had perfect curves, walked past Jilin and walked over. When passing by Jilin, the elven queen said softly without looking at him, "You've worked hard." Jilin was stunned, then waved his hand casually. "I'm fine. You've worked hard." The elven queen smiled. "It's not hard at all." Jilin's body stiffened. He covered his injured eye and felt the wounds all over his body. Then, he tasted the incomparable confidence in the elven queen's words. He did not want to talk to the elven queen anymore. The Demon King looked at the elven queen and said, "You," for a long time without saying anything else. "In this world, you can call me the elven queen," the elven queen said. "Why are you working with the dragon race? This is not something you should be doing." The Demon King's voice was somewhat pained. "I'm just doing what I want to do. This is the only thing I should do." The elven queen's words were incomparably domineering and extremely arrogant. However, when it came out her mouth, it sounded so natural. Even the Demon King, who had a pained expression on his face, was speechless. "Do you also think that those lowly creatures are more suitable to live in this world than us, the true human race?" The Demon King asked with a trembling voice. "Even though they've already damaged this world?" "This is obvious," the Elven Queen said. "Humans have indeed damaged this world. At that time, it also made this world full of vitality. However, you, the true human race, will only turn this world into a deathly stillness. It's obvious who is more suitable for this world. The true human race's failure is not because of you. It's because you were naturally eliminated." The Demon King was dumbfounded. He suddenly felt that the adjectives that those lowly creatures invented were actually so accurate. Like a fishbone stuck in his throat, he now personally experienced this phrase. "Isn't sealing the world in ice the best way to protect the world?" The Demon King said, "Let the world maintain its most beautiful appearance, never changing it in the slightest, and never being harmed by any creatures." Jilin blinked. He thought to himself, "This Demon King looks cultured, refined, and courteous, but in the end, he's a lunatic, so that's how he sees things like sealing the world in ice. No, it should be said that's how the God of Darkness sees things. However, no matter how beautiful and lively it looks, isn't it frozen to death in the end? It's also impossible for everything in the world to be like the muscular big brother imagined by humans. After being sealed in ice for decades, it's still alive and kicking, and it's evenly matched with anyone. Damn it. It's the useless bloodline inheritance that Dad instilled in me again." The Elven Queen also felt that the Demon King was hopeless. His thoughts were deeply rooted, as if they were personally planted by the God of Darkness. Flowers are plucked by humans, and magic is used to prevent them from rotting. Even if they're still beautiful after millions of years, they're still dead in the end. Beauty and appearance has no meaning. This world, or all the creatures in this world, shouldn't become a lifeless flower that won't rot in the hands of the gods. They should live freely with their own will. Only then can they live up to the word life. No, the Demon King slowly shook his head. All living things are foolish. They need someone to guide them in the direction they're going. In this world, there's no path that's more correct than following the direction pointed by the gods. No, humans have long stopped needing the gods to guide them in the direction. The path of life is long and obstructive. One wrong step can lead to eternal damnation. At least we've truly lived before. You don't want the gods to guide all living things? There's no need. You want to let all living things follow their hearts? That's how it should be, even if they walk step by step towards destruction. Everything in this world will eventually be destroyed. Even if they walk towards destruction, the path they're walking is their own. It's better than being forcefully stopped by the gods. You've made up your mind? Of course. Icebound World is my mission. Since that's the case, even if it's you, I'll have to give it a try. The Elven Queen nodded. If you want, go ahead and give it a try. But it's actually meaningless. The Demon King let out a thunderous roar. Behind the Demon King, a huge blue figure with 4 arms suddenly appeared. The blue figure wore a huge crown on his head. Behind him were the shadows of thousands of soldiers and horses. Every single one of them could be seen clearly. The wind and snow howled from the group of blue figures. The Demon King had borrowed the power of the entire true human race. To fight against the Elven Queen, he could only use his full strength right from the start. All things freeze. The Demon King formed a complicated hand seal with both hands. His entire body was emitting a faint blue light. This was his ultimate magic, a magic that was based on the strength of the entire true human race. The stronger the true human race was, the stronger this magic would be. If the true human race could really conquer the world according to their ideas, at that time, the Demon King would be able to use this magic to icebound the world. But even then, the Demon King could still use this magic to directly freeze a huge human city. This was a wide area magic, but the Demon King was only using it on the Elven Queen. The cold air that could instantly freeze a huge city was all directed at the Elven Queen. Chapter 435. Not bad. The Elven Queen looked at the surging cold wave and made a comment. It's a pity that this is the Elven Island. The cold wave that filled the sky was like a collapsing snow mountain. It roared as if it could swallow and freeze everything. It was unstoppable. Even Jilin felt that it was quite troublesome when he saw this power. If he were to face the Demon King's attack, he would either use the Forbidden Land to interrupt the Demon King's attack in advance or rely on his fire dragon's innate talent to resist the cold wave. Anyway, no amount of cold could freeze him. It was just inevitable that he would be injured. However, the Elven Queen only waved her hand lightly when faced with this attack. The Demon King's ultimate magic, the cold wave that could end the world, disappeared just like that. The Demon King's cold wave was like a drizzle in summer. It did exist and filled the entire world, but it was gone now without a trace. It had disappeared completely. It was so clean that it made people wonder if it really existed. Jilin did not have such doubts. He clearly knew that the cold wave was not an illusion. Therefore, he began to sympathize with the Demon King from the bottom of his heart. Speaking of which, it was quite funny. The Demon King was in existence with the mission of destroying the world. Logically speaking, the word sympathy should not be associated with him. Even if there was sympathy, it should be him sympathizing with others. In the end, he actually made 2 people sympathize with him in just a few days. Moreover, these 2 people were determined to be irreconcilable with him. This could only mean that the Demon King's experience was really worth sympathizing with. The Demon King had a duel with Jilin. In the end, he was schemed against by Jilin and was completely at a disadvantage. At that time, Bane looked at him with some sympathy. Now that Jilin saw the Elven Queen casually erase the Demon King's magic, he also felt sympathy for him. Jilin had fought with the Elven Queen before. He knew what the Elven Queen meant on the Elven Island. She was the supreme ruler. She was the rules and reason of everything. Therefore, the Elven Queen was completely unreasonable on the Elven Island. In Jilin's opinion, the Elven Island was the Elven Queen's Forbidden Land. It was even an enhanced version of the Forbidden Land. Here, Not only could the Elven Queen prevent her enemies from casting any spells, she could also get whatever she wanted. Water, fire, wind, and thunder, they came at his call and left at his command. Fighting with the Elven Queen here, Jilin could only sympathize with the Demon King. He couldn't even stand on the same side as the Elven Queen. At most, he would ask the Elven Queen when she killed the Demon King, "Is he dead?" Then, the Elven Queen responded faintly. She got an answer that was not surprising. Jilin was certain that all the creatures in this small world would end up the same if they fought the Elven Queen on the Elven Island. Unable to fight back, he was trampled to death. The Demon King was dumbfounded when he saw that his magic was dispelled. He knew that there was a huge difference between him and the Elven Queen. After all, one was a creation of the god of darkness, while the other was the king of gods created by the gods. But he didn't expect it to be so big. After all, this was a small world. The various laws were not complete, and the divine power could not be fully utilized. Your way of thinking is irresponsible. The Demon King reached out and held the long spear. He looked at the Elven Queen and said painfully, "Since the gods created creatures, they should bear this responsibility. Children should learn to choose their own path when they grow up." The Elven Queen took out her bow and looked at the Demon King. Only then can they have their own lives. Humans will make this world full of holes. It's better than being frozen forever and having no life force. Do you know or not? What does it mean to the gods if this world is frozen? Of course I know. Then why do you? Even so, the creatures in this world should not be sacrificed by the gods. Forget it. You won't listen to me even if I tell you. Now you have two choices. 1. Stay on the Elven Island and never leave. 2. Die here. I have no grudge against you, and I don't really want to kill you. But I have to stop the God of Darkness's plan no matter what. You don't understand the God of Darkness's good intentions. It's he who doesn't understand the difficulty of living and the value of life. What's so valuable about something that the gods can create casually? In comparison, it's more important for the gods to occupy the position of dominator in the greater thousand universe. What's so valuable about the lives created by the creatures? The Elven Queen frowned. Then what are you? If you really think you're not important, why fight so hard? I'm just contributing a little bit of my insignificant strength to maintain the balance of the universe. If everything is just to maintain the balance, then isn't the world like a pool of stagnant water? What's the point of innovation, development, and vitality? Living in a world like a pool of water, even after millions of years, all you see is the reincarnation of generations, a cycle that never ends. If such a world is the pursuit of the gods, then it's no wonder they're so silent about everything. You'll create an unprecedented change. Once the creatures in the lower realm are completely out of the control of the gods, it's useless to say more. The Elven Queen mercilessly interrupted the Demon King. The Demon King immediately stopped talking. Then, he took a deep breath and took a stance in front of the Elven Queen. An ice domain that could be seen with the naked eye suddenly spread around the Demon King's body. Jilin nodded secretly. This was the only way to fight the Elven Queen on the Elven Island. Using the domain to fight against the Elven Queen's Elven Island. Otherwise, he would be suppressed too severely. Even so, it would not be of much use. The Demon King let out a low growl and stomped on the ground. The Demon King rushed out. Several afterimages appeared behind him. Before the afterimages dissipated, the Demon King's spear had already stabbed in front of the Elven Queen. It was really untraceable, and it was as fast as a white steed flashing across a gap. The Demon King's spear intent was still extremely condensed, and all the power was concentrated on the tip of the spear. The spear was silent, but the cold light on the tip of the spear made Jilin's hair stand on end. When he fought with Jilin, the Demon King did not use this realm. This was the Demon King's first spear attack with all his heart, and even his life was integrated into it. However, the Elven Queen only took half a step back and raised her fist to her waist. Jilin was shocked. The Elven Queen was actually in a fist stance. When did she learn the human fist technique? Facing the Demon King's ultimate spear attack, The Elven Queen faced it with her bare hands. The Elven Queen's fist looked petite and cute, and her skin seemed to be so soft that it could be broken by the wind. Because the Queen's skin was so fair that it was almost transparent, the blue veins under her skin were even more obvious. This kind of fist seemed to have grown up without doing any household chores. It did not look intimidating at all, and it was just cute. However, it was such a fist that sent the Eternal Frost spear flying with one punch. The Elven Queen withdrew her fist and then punched again. The Demon King sat on the ground and struggled a few times but could not stand up. Chapter 436. Huff, huff, huff. The Demon King sat on the ground as his chest heaved up and down violently. His hands were trembling nonstop. At this moment, the Demon King felt an unprecedented weakness. Only now did he clearly see the difference between them. The difference between cloud and mud. Fist against spear tip. It was not the fist that was pierced, but the spear that was sent flying. It was really unreasonable. The Demon King felt the recoil from his hands. It was this huge force that made him unable to hold onto the divine weapon that was fused with his soul. The Demon King looked around blankly and suddenly realized that the surrounding grass and trees were still green and full of vitality. Even the air was filled with the fragrance of grass and trees. What did this place look like it had experienced a huge battle? So that cold wave didn't even hurt a single blade of grass or tree on the Elf Island. The Demon King cursed in his heart as he looked at the Elf Queen and said bitterly, "Powerful indeed, worthy of being the future King of Gods. It's just that, dark God." The Demon King's words were intermittent, which made Jilin think of the human who also spoke intermittently. However, Jilin was not the least bit impatient at this moment. He looked at the Demon King with full concentration. He wanted to see what kind of reaction the Demon King would have after being punched to the ground by the Elf Queen. What would he say at this moment? After all, these words could be the last words of the Demon King. However, what Jilin did not expect was that the Demon King did not finish his words. Intermittently, he did not say anything. The Demon King's head was lowered just like that, as if his neck was broken. Jilin's eyes first turned from anticipation to shock, and then slowly widened. Jilin was also unable to react for a moment. What's going on? Only one punch. The Demon King only took one punch. Jilin looked at the Elf Queen, and then could not help but take a step back. He's dead? Jilin asked tentatively. Immediately after, Jilin realized that he seemed to have asked a useless question. The Demon King's body had already started to slowly turn into ice and snow from his head and dissipated with the wind. The Demon King floated like the snow on the ground of the Snow-Wind Empire. He was clearly dead. In that instant, a huge sense of loss rose from the bottom of Jilin's heart. The Demon King died just like that, and he died so quietly. This was not in line with the Demon King's identity as a supreme being. How could you die so peacefully? So quiet? You should die with a bang. Even if he died, he had to make the earth tremble and the mountains shake. This is what a Demon King should do. Turning into ice and snow and dispersing between heaven and earth was indeed poignant and beautiful enough. It was indeed very much in the style of the true humans. However, for a Demon King, it was indeed a little too quiet. Only at the end of their lives will those self-righteous higher beings realize that the essence of life is equal. Even if he was extremely powerful when he was alive, he would still be so quiet and lonely when he died. The Elven Queen's calm voice rang out. It was as calm as the surface of a lake where no wind blew past. Just one punch? Jilin was astonished. He had no doubts about the Elven Queen's victory. However, it was just one punch. Wasn't this a little too much? After fighting with the Demon King for a few days and nights, Jilin was very clear about the Demon King's strength. He could be said to be on par with him, or even slightly stronger than him. Therefore, if the Demon King could not even withstand one punch from the Elven Queen, then the battle between him and the Elven Queen on the Elven Island, how many moves did the Elven Queen have to hold back? The Elven Queen stepped on the green grass and slowly walked step by step to the spot where the Demon King was previously sitting. There was no one there, only a pile of snow that had not been blown away by the wind. The elven queen casually grabbed a handful of snow and waved in the breeze. The pure blue snow fluttered with the wind before it melted, sparkling beautifully. It felt a little dreamy. However, such a scene made Jilin feel uncomfortable. He thought to himself, why did it have to be like this? Even in the knowledge of cruel humans, the phrase crushing bones and scattering ashes was the most vicious curse. His body was already in tatters. After fighting with you for a few days and nights, his body had already suffered a lot of injuries. In addition, he also had to suppress the cold in his body. My punch only triggered the injuries that he had been suppressing. Jilin was silent. Although the Elven Queen made it sound simple, he knew that, of course, things were not as simple as that. If that was the case, why was the Demon King not killed by his punch? However, no matter what, the Demon King was now dead. He could bring Stya's coffin back to the sacred city without having to worry about not being able to raise his head under the sacred king's gaze. Thinking of this, Jilin suddenly shivered. He suddenly felt that the sacred king's gaze in his imagination seemed to be a little heavier than the Elven Queen's fist. Is this over? Jilin said. The hand that the god of darkness stretched out to this world has been broken. Of course not. The Elven Queen stood up and looked at Jilin, shaking her head and laughing. The god of darkness is a supreme god that has existed for countless years. If he really wants to do something, there are very few things that he can't do. Why do you think that he is so easy to deal with? Now that the Demon King is dead, there will be someone among the true humans who will inherit his power. The power of the Demon King will be passed down among the true humans. As long as the true humans are not destroyed, the power of the Demon King will never disappear. Then burn all the true humans to death. Jilin said subconsciously. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, Jilin felt that something was not right. The reason why Jilin and the Elven Queen could work together was because they both believed in the principle of equality of all life. However, after the series of events, Jilin realized that the equality of all life that the Elven Queen believed in was not the same as the equality of all life that he believed in. Jilin believed that pigs, dogs, cows, sheep, humans, true humans, they were all the same. Only the dragon race was above all things. Only the celestial race could barely stand shoulder to shoulder with them. The rest were not worth mentioning. However, the Elven Queen believed that all things were equal. She and the celestial race were equal, and the lives of humans were as precious as the lives of the celestial race. Therefore, it was undoubtedly inappropriate to say something like burn all the true humans to death in front of the Elven Queen. Burning all the true humans to death is definitely out of the question. Jilin raised his hand and rubbed his chin. He pretended to be calm and hurriedly tried to find an excuse. Then what can we do to completely eradicate the Demon King? Jilin looked at the Elven Queen and asked seriously. It was a question, but it was also a change of topic. That's easy, the Elven Queen said. You just need to use the divine light god's sacred sword to give the Demon King a fatal blow. Then, the power of the Demon King will dissipate. Then why didn't you say so earlier? Jilin was instantly anxious. He knew very well that Bane had been tailing him with the sacred sword for several days now. If the Elven Queen had said this earlier, they could have completely eradicated the Demon King today. You know you won't hold back? Wait for me to bring the sacred sword over. In just a short while, you must kill him with one punch to show that you're powerful. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.